Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old
web interface.
union has come in here to dwell.
The largest union talk radio program in these southern United States. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. The lines are open. You can go ahead and give us a call if you would like. We'd love to hear from you. Interested in how your week was going, how you're doing, what's going on in your world, particularly as it relates to labor. Got a bunch of people in the chat already. Matt says, good morning. Greg says, good morning from SoCal. Fight Oligarchy Tour is in Los Angeles today. Main speakers start at 1. Sounds like you're going to be going to that. That sounds exciting. We have sent a letter to Bernie Sanders from the Labor Council inviting him to Huntsville, but I don't think he's coming.
If anyone listening.
If anybody's listening, if we have any Bernie staff on, that's tuning in.
You know, we joke, but I hear all the time that apparently there are important people in D.C. and in Montgomery who occasionally listen to the program if for no other reason to see what we're talking about whether we're talking about them. So, anyone listening, if you have connections to Senator Bernie Sanders or his staff, we would love to see that tour make its way down to Alabama, sweet home Alabama.
Absolutely. Dr. Mad Matt says, good morning from North Carolina. Brandon says, good morning, fellow workers. Quirky Geek Girl says, good morning. It was so great to go out last weekend with some of the expats here in Toronto. Greg says, hey, Mad Mad, that's awesome. I'm from North Carolina originally. The guy in SoCal is from North Carolina originally. Very cool, very cool. Love to hear that.
Yeah, a little reunion in the chat.
Little reunion, that's right. Small world. Mark, good to see you, Mark. I love liberal tears. I don't even know what you're talking about. I guess you're referring to the title of the YouTube stream. Says how the Trump administration is unwinding America's meager worker protections. Presumably that's what you're talking about. I don't know. That seems not good for you or for the rest of us. We'll be talking about that in overtime. We have a former Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Labor, a former high-ranking OSHA official, a political appointee, on to talk about the Trump administration's what he's doing to OSHA and MSHA and everything like that. So Ben Joe says, good morning, y'all. Solidarity. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Really do. I wanted to start with a recap of where we are with some of the federal worker stuff. Folks will obviously remember that the Trump administration has embarked on a campaign to get rid of as many probationary workers from the federal government as possible. So far, that number is up to something like 30,000. And there were 2 court orders making the administration rehire those probationary workers at most agencies because the courts found in both venues, both in Maryland and California, that the administration had fired the employees illegally. That's a common misconception about probationary employees within the federal government. The misconception is that they have zero rights and they can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. And that is simply not true. It is easier to fire probationary employees within the federal government, but there are not no rights for probationary federal workers. And the standards that have been set by Congress is that probationary employees, if they are let go, it must be for cause. It must be for cause. And the way that the administration has done this is that they said that all of these probationary employees were terminated because of poor performance. And there's no evidence given for that. There's lots of evidence to counter that assertion, lots of evidence attesting to the fact that this was just willy-nilly, that there was no attempt to assess the performance of these probationary employees, and that they just wanted to get rid of them. They wanted to do a reduction in force without going through the procedures of a reduction in force, which Congress has put in place. And a lot of people are talking about Article 2, Article 2, Article 2. The chief executive is he's the chief of the executive branch. He can do whatever he wants within the executive branch. And I feel like I'm going a little bit crazy because there is an article before Article 2, and that is Article 1. And Article 1 states that Congress has the power of the purse, and Congress gets to decide how money is spent, and it is the executive's job to faithfully execute and faithfully do the things that Congress said he needs to do, right? And so I feel like I'm going crazy. People talking about Article 2, as if it's actually Article 1, and there's nothing else after it. It's like a one and only article. Article 2, that's the only thing happening within the Constitution, and that's not so. Congress has said there are reduction in force procedures. Congress has said that probationary employees must be terminated for cause. And so courts in Maryland determined that these firings were illegal. The cases in Maryland were brought by attorneys general of states, and their standing claim was basically that this is going to overwhelm the unemployment systems within their states. The one in California, this was brought by AFGE and several nonprofit organizations. And the standing claim in California was actually based on the nonprofit organizations. I read the ruling, a couple of the actual court cases yesterday, and I was surprised that the standing in the California case was based on the nonprofit organizations, not AFGE as a representative organization. So I don't know exactly why the attorneys decided to go with that theory of standing rather than AFGE as a union. But the theory of standing for the nonprofit organizations is that, there were contracts with the government and there were services that the government provided that's going to be, it's going to be more difficult for the government to do now that there are less probationary employees. And so that was the theory of standing. It was granted in the initial court cases. And in California, the Supreme Court overruled the California court and said that these nonprofit organizations, in fact, do not have standing. And so now there is an attempt to establish AFGE's standing in this case. So that's gone back down to the lower court. It's not over yet, and the Supreme Court did not rule on the merits. They only ruled on standing. And so, we'll see where that goes. But that's back down in California, and AFGE is trying to argue that they have standing now. In Maryland, a court of appeals above that court, not the Supreme Court, but a court of appeals also said that the attorneys general do not have standing, and they kicked that back down. And so now these orders to rehire probationary employees are officially void, even though, again, no ruling on the merits. There has been no ruling overturning the merits of these court cases. It's all been rulings on standing. And so we'll see what happens now. I think maybe one of the reasons that they were trying to not rely on AFGE's standing is because the government's position on the AFGE's standing has been that there is a separate system outside of the federal courts that unions have to go through for adverse employment decisions, and that is the Merit Systems Protections Board. But AFGE has obviously noticed that the Merit Systems Protection Board is no longer has a quorum because of the firing of Kathy Harris, which was the Biden-appointed head of the Merit Systems Protections Board. And so the Merit Systems Protection Board cannot rule on the issue of these probationary firings, right? And so we're in a catch-22 here. But that's kind of where we're at right now. There is now no ruling constraining the Trump administration from firing probationary employees at will. And so, we'll see if the probationary employees who had been rehired are going to now be refired again. And we'll see what happens there. But obviously, all of this could be, it's worth emphasizing, all of this could be set aside by the Trump administration if they just simply went through a reduction in force. Congress has put forward a way for them to do that, and they can do that. But they're not doing that because they want to purposefully run up against the reins that Congress has set on the executive branch, because they want to destroy them. They want the executive branch to be able to do whatever they want, right? Another thing that they've done is ostensibly try to eliminate collective bargaining rights for 1 million federal workers, for most federal workers on national security grounds. AFGE has also filed suit against this, based primarily on two things. One being the overly broad interpretation of the national security exemption in the Civil Service Reform Act, basically saying that the law is not being faithfully executed. You don't have the authority to interpret the national security exemption in this broad of a way. And two, that this is retaliation for the union's First Amendment protected speech. Basically that, if the union had not been, the union is arguing that the Trump administration is only doing this in retaliation against the union. Like, if the union had been less publicly critical of the Trump administration, then they wouldn't be doing this. And, the Trump administration all but admitted that in their fact sheet, where they said that federal unions are, quote, waging a war or attacking the Trump administration, and the Trump administration is not going to abide that. And so, very clear, obvious arguments there on both things. And that's where we are kind of legally. And I just want to take a step back and remind people that this is the largest assault on union rights since PATCO in 1980. And Joseph McCartin wrote a history of the PATCO strike called Collision Course, and he has an article about where federal workers stand and kind of comparing and contrasting it with PATCO. He has that article in Labor Notes and Dissent magazine. It's a really, really, really good article. I would recommend folks reading it if you want to dig deep into it. But, some of the main points that McCartin makes is that PATCO had isolated itself in opposition to a popular president, a then popular president at the time. Ronald Reagan had high popularity when he did this. They had isolated themselves in multiple ways. They had endorsed Reagan. Like, a lot of people don't remember that. PATCO endorsed Reagan. The Air Traffic Controllers Union endorsed Reagan in 1980, and because they felt like they had a deal that Reagan was going to give them a big raise, basically. Reagan didn't do that, and so they went on strike. And when they went on strike, they did not attempt to build relationships with the public. They did not even attempt to build relationships within the broader airline industry, right? And so, so pilots did not strike in sympathy. And pilots didn't even have to strike. Pilots could have just asserted their right to say the skies are not safe and therefore we will not fly. Right? They could have done that without saying that we are striking. And that would have been a huge, huge blow to the Reagan administration and would have made it much more difficult for him to replace all 12,000 air traffic controllers. And so the PATCO had isolated themselves. Ronald Reagan was popular. That is contra the situation that federal workers are in right now. Federal workers are, by and large, appreciated by the public. Federal workers are actively trying to build relationships and coalitions with other labor unions and trying to strengthen those relationships. And Donald Trump is not popular, particularly with respect to what he is doing to federal workers. Like, Donald Trump is a historically unpopular president generally, and within his general unpopularity, Doge is the least popular thing that he is doing. And so, we have a very different dynamic here. Now, McCartin mentions that, striking is still probably not going to be the answer for federal workers right now, because, they don't seem viable, right? A federal McCartan says in his article, a federal workers walkout might only speed the firing of its participants by an administration bent on shrinking the federal workforce by any means necessary. Yet other forms of civil disobedience might be devised that could elicit broad popular support. For some workers, maybe it looks like demanding to work, resisting being kicked out of their workplaces, or publicly carrying on their work in an alternative setting. Or maybe it looks like sit-ins and disruptive protests that take the fight to the people holding the levers of power. What if protesters began to risk mass arrests at Tesla dealerships or congressional district offices, or set up Muskvilles that occupy federal properties? Whatever strategy emerges, devising it must be the work of all union members, not only the elected leaders. The readers of labor notes and participants in the vibrant Federal Unionists Network are well positioned to work out strategies experimentally on the local level. However it emerges, there must be an action strategy. Labor simply cannot afford a defeat that will dwarf PATCO by comparison. And so there we go. That's the situation with federal workers right now, and a little bit of historical context. I cannot recommend enough reading this full piece by Joseph McCartan in Dissent magazine. PATCO's Lessons for This Crisis. Really encourage folks to check that out. Have we got Errol on the line? Errol Miner is a vice president of CWA Local 3902, a departmental vice president in Birmingham, Alabama. He is also a member of the CWA National Civil Rights and Equity Committee and a host of the CWA's Hour of Power radio program on KYOK in Houston, Texas. Brother Miner, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. It's good to have you on.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's good to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate what you're doing on KYOK in Houston, Texas. That's really exciting. Not very many union radio programs out there in the country, and especially not in the South. So glad to be able to connect with you on that basis. We don't have just too much time, but I wanted to start with your, how did you become a union member? Like, is this something that your parents were union members and you knew you wanted to get a union job, or how did that happen?
That's an easy answer, Jacob. Union is in my blood. Actually, my parents were presidents of their labor union. Both of them were educators. They were in Bessemer Education Association, the Alabama Education Association, and the National NEA, National Education. And when I went to work, I automatically, from day one, signed up with CWA Communication Workers of America.
That is fantastic. Really exciting to hear, family tradition of unionism, especially in the South. And that's not as rare as people would think, right? I mean, I love saying this every time that I get the opportunity to. In the 1950s and 60s, 1 in every 4 workers in Alabama were union members. That is a higher union density rate than every state in the country right now. So it's not as rare as many people think. And so being a union member is one thing, but being really involved in your union is a whole other step, right? I mean, I listed off your titles. You're a departmental vice president. You're on a national committee with CWA. You host a union radio program. Why did you decide to take that step to be really active in your union?
Listen, unionization is very important. When you really take a look at the Communication Workers of America, CWA has welcomed a legacy of fighters who believe in the dignity of job and non-negotiable, especially for Black, Brown, LGBTQIA plus and marginalized workers. So why did I get more involved? I got more involved because silence was an option. And of course, as I stated prior, is that it's just in my blood. And after becoming a member of CWA, I saw that the connections between the struggles we face on the job and the larger civil rights battles happening in our community. So it was just a connection. And whether it is racial bias in hiring unsafe working conditions disproportionately impacting workers of color, or attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, I knew I had to act, and that was something that I wanted to be involved in. And further on down the road, CWA has speak out that stretches beyond the work.
And so you kind of broke up there right at the end. Can you repeat what you were saying right before you wrapped up?
Okay, I was saying CWA has given me the tools and the family, meaning other union workers, other union members, to organize, speak out, and build collective power that stretches beyond the workplace.
Mm. Right. And that's really, really important. I appreciate that and trying to underline that point, because it's not enough for us just to have power in our workplace, right? We really do need to, make connections to the community, build relationships and within the community, and build political power on top of union power. And so, talk to us about the radio program that you do in Houston. What is the, how did that start, and what are the goals of that program, and what kind of stuff do y'all talk about week to week?
Okay, I'm glad you asked. This program was just dropped into our lap. So it started on February 29th, which is a leap year. And so we've been on the air for 1 year. The CWA Hour Power radio show talks of labor, human rights, civil rights, how it intersects on the airwaves. We use it to amplify the voices that often get left out of mainstream conversations. And this radio show is the brainchild and the baby of our international president, Mr. Claude Cummings. And then also it's led by our director, Angie Wells, which is over the human rights and health and safety for CWA.
And do you have guests on this program, and what are the kind of guests that you have if you do?
Yes, we do have guests on the program, and I must also say it's not just me as being the host of the CWA Hour Power Radio Show. We have other hosts there, Mr. Reginald Small out of Dallas, Texas, Micaiah Jones out of North Carolina, Timia Wiley also out of North Carolina, and then Miss Taquasion Atkins out of Phoenix, Arizona. So we have all of these hosts together. We bring up and talk about various labor issues, as well as those human rights stories that affect the marginalized communities all around. So yes, we do have guests, and they come on just like you have me on, and we're doing it by Zoom. So that's awesome. And so yes, we have a plethora of guests from all over.
And so, you've spoke some about, the importance of civil rights and fighting for marginalized groups within the union. Can you talk specifically about the goal of civil rights work within the CWA? Like, why have a National Civil Rights and Equity Committee? What is the purpose of that? And what are you trying to do through your work within that national committee?
The goal of my civil rights work in CWA is to make sure that no one is left behind. Civil rights and equity, it took a forefront back in 1964 with the civil rights movement. We're just coming out of segregation and Jim Crow. And so a lot of times people only think that civil rights is
I'm sorry,
Black
Errol,
Americans'
maybe
rights. And that's not true. Not only diverse in membership, but
why don't we, for the last, as we're wrapping the interview up, why don't you go off video, I think we're still having some problems, and maybe if we can lower the bandwidth of some of the stuff that you're some of the information coming through the airwaves, maybe that'll help. And so you were talking about, the civil rights movement and the importance of kind of integrating that work into the labor movement. Continue.
Yes. So we're fighting for a union that is not only diverse in membership, but also deeply committed to equity and inclusion in its leadership and its priorities. And that means addressing systemic racism, fighting for accessibility, as well as challenging any anti-LGBTQIA policies and protecting the rights of all workers, regardless of immigration status, gender identity, or background. And civil rights work in the union is about creating a just workplace and a just world hand in hand.
That's really important. And so how do you respond when you have members of the union, and I'm sure you do, everybody has, everybody has folks like this in their workplace, in their life, that respond kind of negatively to that sort of mission, and who kind of perceives mission of civil rights and diversity, equity, and inclusion as an attack on them and their identity? You still there? We may have.
Well, that's a bummer.
Internet may have finally gone out.
I hate we lost Errol because for folks who aren't aware, CWA does put a big priority on human rights. It's something that, as a CWA member myself, I hear about and see, trainings and conferences and just work happening all over the country. In fact, Brother Errol Miner has been doing lots of implicit bias training throughout the South. I know he had a training recently in Huntsville with CWA members. Mm-hmm. And so I really do appreciate that. And really appreciate that work that Errol's doing and that CWA is doing. And you're right, Jacob, it is something that can be controversial among some members. But, as Dr. King said, it's always the right time to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where our responsibility lies as unionists.
Yeah. Errol, I think you're back. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to say or if you had heard my question.
No, I didn't hear the question. I'm back though. It's this pesky hotel internet, so I had to switch over to the hot spot. You follow me?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, well, the last thing that we were kind of discussing was just how do you approach folks that that feel a certain type of way about this kind of work, about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every union has folks that kind of perceive themselves as being attacked by these types of things. And so how do you respond when somebody comes to you with a complaint about this kind of work?
Well, listen, Jacob, that falls up under implicit bias training. One of the things that I try to do when I make sure that I am teaching the implicit bias training, I look for signs that someone is very uncomfortable when we're talking about stuff. And I actually take the time to talk to them and let's work it out, because with these implicit bias trainings, they're in a small setting. So you have the time to allow people to ask those uncomfortable questions that are in the back of their minds. And so with the implicit bias training offered, it's an in-depth look at the unconscious attitudes and the stereotypes that affect our decisions and actions. And through real world scenarios, we have an open dialogue and reflection exercises. And what I have found out, we have more people that are enjoying the implicit bias trainings and the gender justice trainings because it's giving them an opportunity to learn. People come with a heart that is open. I was just in Bluff City, Tennessee on last week, Monday and Tuesday, and it was awesome.
I appreciate that. Really, really excited that you're doing that work, and that's really important, and that we do give people a space to ask, some of those uncomfortable questions where, they can ask them and they can get answers. And so, Brother Errol Miner, Departmental Vice President, CWA Local 3902, and host of the CWA's Hour of Power radio program on KYOK in Houston, Texas. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Have a wonderful weekend.
We're going to take a break, and we will be right back.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Since 1889, the National Association of Letter Carriers has protected the rights of city carriers as they deliver the mail and offer support for their community. The Alabama State Association of Letter Carriers makes their legislative voices heard when it comes to issues involving the U.S. Postal Service and the working members of the union. The National Association of Letter Carriers has been longtime supporters of the Muscular Dystrophy Association and the Stamp Out Hunger Food Drive. This message is sponsored by the Alabama Association of Letter Carriers. To learn more, visit nalc.org. Unite Here is also a supporter of the Valley Labor Report. They are a labor union that represents 300,000 working people across Canada and the United States. Their members work in the hotel, gaming, food service, manufacturing, textile, distribution, laundry, transportation, and airport industries. You can learn more about Unite Here at unitehere.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract. If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
That's right, folks. From the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today on the program, we just finished taking a look at what federal the updates around federal workers and the probationary firings and things like that. If you missed that, you can find us on YouTube and Facebook to rewatch the beginning of the stream. We're going to be going over tariffs again. Big news in tariffs. We're going to be responding to some of Sean Fain's speech from Thursday night and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, you can give us a call. The phone number is open, and it is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. You can also call and leave a voicemail at any time of day throughout the week. Just a reminder, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm, but we are also on YouTube, Facebook, and wherever you get your podcasts, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners, so if you want to become a sustaining donor to the program or just make a one-time donation, you can go to tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/the Valley Labor Report. We also have a bunch of cool merch for sale at tvlr.fm/store. And finally, if you are a member of a union, you can get your local to sponsor the show. You can reach out to us for more details about that at tvlr.fm/contact.
Hey y'all, let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WGOW, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just a few diehard unionists who want to amplify the voices of the working class here in the American South. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we can't do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we appreciate you spending some time with us.
And with that, let's get to last week in Southern labor, where we take a look at what workers in the United States South and the American colonies were up to last week. Here's what they were up to from April 4th to the 11th in new union campaigns. 12 workers at the Davy Tree Expert Company in Huntington, Tennessee, filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 429. 24 workers at the Occidental Chemical Corporation in New Johnsonville, Tennessee, filed a petition to hold a union election with the United Association of Plumbers and Steamfitters, UA, Local 572. 18 workers at Starbucks in Huntsville, Alabama, Roll Tide, filed a petition to hold a union election with Starbucks Workers United. They would be the third union Starbucks in the state if they win. 310 tech workers at the Washington Post in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the News Guild, CWA. And 31 workers at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, Local 500. Just a reminder, there are more union filings, campaign updates, and election results, and more in the newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter at TVLR.fm. In campaign updates, Fairfax County workers in Virginia were recently given the right to unionize, and now there is a fight over which union will represent them. SEIU Local 512 has already filed a petition and was moving towards an election, but the Fairfax Workers Coalition, FWC, wanted the county workers to be broken into multiple bargaining units so that they could represent some of them. So the FWC filed a lawsuit attempting to stop the election from proceeding. In election results, workers withdrew the decertification petition at Norwood Hills Country Club in Jennings, Missouri, meaning that Unite Here Local 74 still represents the 16 workers there. 119 workers at Breakthrough Beverage in St. Louis, Missouri, withdrew their petition for a union election. Teamsters have been on a good run at this company, though, so maybe they were voluntarily recognized. 4 workers at Wood County Electric Cooperative in Quitman, Texas, voted 4-0 in favor of unionization with IBEW Local 738. 16 workers at Starbucks in San Antonio, Texas, voted 10-4 in favor of unionization with Starbucks Workers United, as did 19 workers at another location in Dallas, 10-7. 22 workers at Volunteer Ministry Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, voted 11-9 in favor of unionization with SEIU Local 205. 18 workers at UFCW Local 1996 as an employer withdrew their petition for a union election with the Federation of Agents and International Representatives, FAIR. And flight dispatchers at Avelo Airlines in Houston, Texas, voted in favor of unionization with the Transport Workers Union, TWU. In grievances, unfair labor practices, and court cases, both court cases, one in Maryland and one in California, that had ordered the government to rehire probationary employees have now been overturned, but neither on the merits, both only on standing. A hearing was held on Wednesday to determine whether AFGE might have standing in the California case, but a decision has not been made yet. The Supreme Court issued a stay on lower court orders, putting Kathy Harris and Gwen Wilcox back on the Merit Systems Protection Board and the National Labor Relations Board, respectively. This is not a ruling on the merits, but it does not look good. If the Supreme Court sides with the president, they will be overturning nearly 100-year-old precedent that allows Congress to create job protections for board members of federal agencies. The Supreme Court ruled that it had been correctly decided that the government must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a union apprentice with the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Union, SMART. This follows strong messaging from the normally more conservative building trades unions, with them calling to bring him home now. A Louisiana immigration judge determined that the United States can deport Mahmoud Khalil, a lawful permanent resident and former UAW member, because of, I kid you not, his beliefs and associations. Without even so much as an allegation of a crime, Khalil has until April 23rd to file for relief. Otherwise, he will be deported to Syria or Algeria. In strikes and bargaining updates, the Communication Workers of America, CWA, and AT&T Southwest came to a tentative agreement for a new 4-year contract with a 14.5% increase in pay. Along with other improvements, ratification votes will be held between April 21st and May the 5th. 3,400 members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, IAMAW, Local Lodge 2003, ratified a new 5-year contract with M1 Support Services and its subcontractors at Fort Novacell, Alabama, also known as Fort Rucker. The contract includes a 14% pay raise, more time off, and higher 401k contributions, and more, according to the union. 3 other IAMAW locals representing 600 workers for ULA in California, Alabama, and Florida met with the company to begin bargaining for a new agreement. The current contract expires on May the 1st. The union says they are bargaining for better progression, higher pay, and more leave. 100 bus drivers and mechanics and members of the Transport Workers Union, TWU, Local 248, ratified a new 3-year agreement with the Winston-Salem Transit Authority in North Carolina that includes a 25% wage increase, improved sick pay, and an expansion of bereavement leave. The UAW is in bargaining for a new contract with Lockheed Martin in Denver, Colorado, UAW Local 66, and Orlando, Florida, UAW Local 788. The union is fighting for higher pay and lower progressions. Lockheed Martin supposedly issued their last, best, and final offer last week, which maintains long progressions to top pay between 16 and 23 years. Each union local held a town hall last week, and the bargaining committee will be coming out with more information about how they proceed in the coming weeks. Union members in Kentucky are protesting a contractor at Western Kentucky University for not using union standards in pay and compensation for new construction. Members of the Office and Professional Employees International Union, OPEIU Local 277 in Austin, Texas, at Book People recently secured a new contract with strong protections against AI replacement of workers. 400 TransDev bus drivers in Houston, Texas, unionized with the Teamsters Local 988, ratified a new collective bargaining agreement with a significant pay increase and a pension. In political and legislative updates, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, announced that it would, quote, that it would be, quote, expeditiously, unquote, reviewing, quote, new science, unquote, on fluoride in drinking water. Again, I'm not kidding. Trump's Department of Labor is officially pausing the enforcement of the new silica rule, which will kill more coal miners. Other cuts include grants to fight child labor worldwide. Jordan Barab has more about how the administration is effectively undertaking a war on coal miners. Even though the Department of Labor is busy slashing staff and office space, they did make time to hold the new secretary a big birthday party, complete with cocktails and wine. Biden's acting Labor Secretary, Julie Su, has an article in the Century Foundation about what these cuts will mean for working folks. Florida lawmakers are trying to roll back a law that offers some protections to day laborers, like being told how much money they'll be making at the behest of a staffing agency that has violated said law in the past. North Carolina is proposing increased premiums for state workers' health insurance plan. The state's public sector workers union is speaking out in opposition to the proposal. Democratic lawmakers reintroduced the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, a bill that would give collective bargaining rights to all public sector workers in the country, with support from unions like the CWA. Kansas City Council members approved nearly $50 million to tide the bus system over for the next 6 months, but a long-term solution is still needed, or else there will be drastic cuts. In internal union affairs, the West Virginia Education Association, WVEA, and the American Federation of Teachers West Virginia, AFT-WV, are merging into one union that will now be called Education West Virginia in an effort to consolidate power and fight back against anti-education policies coming from the legislature. Adam says he is very excited about this and would love to interview somebody involved if you would like to talk to us about it. That's it for our union updates. If we missed anything, let us know. TVLR.fm/contact, and we'll try to include it in next week's roundup. All right. So let's talk about these tariffs again. As we know, Trump did Liberation Day and then walked it back. And so, now we're kind of in limbo. The markets tumbled, and then they recouped some of those losses, and then they tumbled again. And so we're really in a state of flux. But the UAW in particular has been coming out particularly strongly in favor of the destruction of the free trade system, because the free trade system has been so detrimental to working people in the United States and across the globe. And so, Sean Fain did a long speech on the UAW's YouTube channel on Thursday, where he really broke down and kind of got into the nitty-gritty of the union's position on tariffs. And he made some really important points that I wanted to go over some here. And he started off with talking about how unions and particularly the UAW approach politics that I think is a really good place to kind of level set. So let's listen to how he opened his talk.
One of the great divide and conquer tricks the ruling class has played on the working class of this country is to see politics like a spectator sport. They want everyone who chooses to wear a red hat to hate everyone who votes blue. If you're on the blue team, you have to hate everything the red team does. Both sides talk about bullshit issues to hype up their fan base, while the real issues that impact working class people are never addressed. In the labor movement, at our best, we have a different way of doing politics. We don't make politics about personalities or parties. We see politics as a negotiation. We don't sit down to negotiate with corporate executives because we like them or because we trust them. We focus on what we need as a working class and what the hell it's going to take to get it. And we do that whether we're sitting across from the friendliest CEO or the meanest Wall Street con artist. Politics are just like contract negotiations. You win what you have the power to fight for.
So I think that is a really, really important place to level set and to remind people that this is how we approach politics too here on the Valley Labor Report. We are not a Democrat radio program. We are not and certainly not a Republican radio program. We are a union radio program. And so, that's how we approach politics. We approach politics from a working class, an organized labor perspective. And so we want to take a look at what is going to benefit the working class, generally speaking. And I thought that what he said specifically about how we, as unions, we negotiate with employers, not because we love them, right? I mean, the UAW, when they go to negotiate with Ford, they don't do that because they love the Ford's, third generation owner Prince guy, right? Like they don't love him, but they negotiate with him. And they praise the company when they do things that are good for the workers, when they agree to things that the UAW is asking for, and they fight them like hell when they are doing things the UAW is not asking for, right? And so I think that's a really good place to level set and just like say, this is how we approach politics and how we think that everybody should approach politics. It's not like red team, blue team. It's about the policies, and are the policies good or bad for working people, right? And this is kind of something of a bailiwick of ours. I don't know, Adam, if you had anything else that you wanted to say about that idea.
Yeah, just that, I think that is really how we approach these issues. And you may disagree on our conclusions, right? You may think that we're off base on any particular issue or subject. But, please do know that's absolutely the perspective we take. It's what is working for the working class, what's not working for the working class. And it is specifically around the working class majority, the vast majority of us who do not own capital, but instead work for a living. And that's not how everyone does politics. A lot of people are very hyper-partisan and do treat it like a team sport. You also have a lot of people who will be very explicit with you that they are about business, right? They look at what's good for businesses. Alabama's politicians are notorious for that. They brag about the fact that they set policies to be good for businesses.
Right.
And we take a different approach. We look at actual people and put people above profits and put the planet above profits, and look at what's really good for the working class majority, and evaluate that and recognize that these politicians are folks that we have to pressure, whether it's folks that you like, right? Just we run into this all the time, especially in more local and state-based politics, where people will say, "Oh, but I know their mama and them. I go to church with them. They're good people." But they are doing destructive things day in, day out to you and your community and your family. And so you've got to look beyond personality, beyond party, and look at the substance of what are they actually doing? Who are they actually representing? Are they representing regular folks like us, or are they representing special interest? The types of folks who can, afford to contribute to campaigns, to do super PACs, and all of that kind of thing. So I appreciate President Fain, making that distinction. And again, you may disagree with some of the conclusions that come from that perspective, and that's fine. And we can actually have the same kind of class-based perspective and reach different conclusions. But I do think that's really important, because that is not typically what you hear in the media. Right. If you tune into the typical talk radio show that's going to be on WVNN, where you may be listening right now, it is not about, they don't approach politics and the news of the day based on what they calculate is best for the working class majority. It is very much not that way. It is in a partisan way or an entertainment-based way. But that's not, that's not helpful for us. And so that's what I encourage all of my members or all of the workers that I engage with is, take those party blinders off and look realistically at what's helping working people, what's hurting working people. Let's look at the real enemies here, and, have situational allies as they are appropriate, but, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, typically in politics.
Right. And he does a little bit more level setting, and we're going to go through all, a little bit of each of the things that he tries to level set on. And another one that he does is just a reminder that the UAW has always opposed. It's not a new thing for the UAW to be opposing free trade. And so let's listen to this.
One thing we've always fought for, under Democrats or Republicans, is an end to the free trade disaster. We've seen some reckless and chaotic activity on trade from this administration, and there's a lot of fear of disruption. But what we have to remember is that disruption's not new to factory workers in this country. Disruption is what we've been living with for 30 years under a free trade disaster. It doesn't mean we support reckless random tariffs. You know, I don't believe that's the answer to all this. But there is a reason for tariffs. And it's also a mistake to just defend the status quo, especially when it comes to free trade.
And that's so important. And I think, you know, as much criticism as Shawn Fain has gotten, I really do think that the UAW is threading the needle well here. And it is a needle that needs to be thread, because right now, and Hakeem Jeffries has come out and been publicly critical of the UAW and is saying that doing this threading of the needle is detrimental to the Democrats' messaging that tariffs are bad. And Hakeem Jeffries has said, you know, like, well, look, you know, when we're in good faith, and also, you know, Hakeem Jeffries is the vehicle for this thing, but I think that this position could be held by a person in good faith, and so, you know, I'll present it that way. But, you know, Hakeem Jeffries has said that by threading this needle and saying Trump tariffs bad, but some tariffs good, and so we need to kind of walk this line here, you are making it more difficult for people to kind of understand the message that the Trump tariffs are bad and that this is not going to be something that helps working people. And I, like, you know, for one, it's not the union's job to message for the Democrats, you know, so like, I'm sorry, Hakeem Jeffries and my good faith friends, that's not our job, that's your job. Our job is to represent our members and the working class. And like Shawn Fain said, the working class has continued to face disruption during the free trade disaster, and that is something that is common particularly to people in the automotive manufacturing industry. And something that, you know, and something on the flip side that he has said, that Shawn Fain has said, these tariffs need to be paired with other things like industrial policy, like investment. You know, there was a good historical anecdote from Sam Gindin, who was a senior advisor for then the Canadian Auto Workers Union and now for Unifor, about how in the 80s, Ronald Reagan put quotas on Japanese car manufacturers, and that did not actually increase working standards for American auto workers. What happened was Japanese automotive manufacturers came to the South and exploited Southern workers. And so much like the argument for free trade has been, you know, maybe some American auto workers are going to be hurt, but Mexican auto workers are going to be lifted up, and American consumers are going to be benefited. Well, obviously, union auto workers in America have been hurt. Mexican auto workers have been hurt. Their real wages have been cut by 50% since the introduction of NAFTA. When NAFTA was introduced, a Mexican auto worker made on average $6 an hour. Now they make $3 an hour, okay? Cut in by 50%. But also, auto workers in Alabama have had their working conditions cut. When Mercedes first came to Alabama in the 90s, which was also, you know, kind of coincidentally, when NAFTA was introduced, the average Alabama auto worker made 20% more than they do today. They have faced a 20% pay cut, right? So this free trade thing has not been beneficial to working people. And so one of the things that people have been criticizing Shawn Fain on, and we're not going to spend very much time on this because it is silly, and I think Shawn Fain speaks for himself well here, is that, you know, oh, well, Shawn Fain is trying to cozy up to the Trump administration. Shawn Fain is trying to, you know, mollycoddle Trump and play nice with him. And I just don't think that you can actually see what the UAW has done and come to that conclusion. I don't think you can, because here, I'm going to play this clip for you. Shawn Fain is going to list off a litany of criticisms that he and his union have made very publicly against the Trump administration. And in this context, when we're talking, when we have this big video about tariffs and you know, free trade and everything, they are said as an aside, but each of these have been their own big thing for the UAW. The UAW has issued, you know, single statements about each of these issues. The UAW has participated in rallies specifically for each of these issues, right? And so these are not, you know, they're said as an aside in this long conversation about free trade, but they are not a side issue for the UAW, and the UAW is taking them very seriously. And so here are some, just a few of the things that the UAW has criticized the Trump administration on.
So far, here's what we've seen from the Trump administration. We've seen the destruction of bargaining rights for 1 million federal workers. That's not good for the working class. We've seen attacks on the National Labor Relations Board, including illegally firing a board member, leading to deadlock on workers' cases. That's not good for the working class. We've seen attacks planned on Social Security, on Medicare, on Medicaid, programs that millions of workers depend on. That's not good for the working class. We've seen the absolute trampling of constitutional rights. We have seen the First Amendment go up in smoke at college campuses with detentions, deportations, expulsions, and firings of people who dared to speak out against and protest against a war, just to call for a ceasefire. We have seen the right to due process disappear as working people are deported for no crime and no reason. That's not good for the working class. Mahmoud Khalil, who has now been detained for over a month for protesting the war, is a former UAW member. Grant Miner, the UAW president of Local 2710 at Columbia University, was expelled for protesting a war the day before the bargaining was going to start. Ramisa Ozturk, an SEIU member at Tufts University, has been detained for writing an op-ed. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a sheet metal apprentice in Maryland, was deported for no reason, no crime, to a prison in El Salvador. We've seen the arbitrary and unlawful termination of hundreds of our members' visas, which may lead to their unjust deportation. And the list goes on. And there is a reason we campaigned aggressively against this vision of America in the last election. We will continue to speak out against it and mobilize against it. This week, our union participated in mass protests around the country as part of our campaign to kill the cuts at the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. The NIH is a part of the federal government that funds essential scientific research. That's not waste. It's not fraud. It's not abuse. We represent 5,000 members who just won their first union contract at the National Institute of Health. We also represent tens of thousands of members whose jobs rely on funding provided by NIH at universities across the country. When we cure cancer, when we save lives with new medications, it's because of these workers who bust their asses on high-level research that changes the world. Our government should expand funding for life-saving research and allow researchers in the U.S. to be the first to find cures for diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. Cutting research funding kills union jobs, and even worse, it kills the hope of working people who rely on this research to see new treatments to save the loved ones' lives.
Okay, so there you go. And we're going to talk some more about some of those issues later on in the program, but it is very, very clear Shawn Fain is not doing, frankly, what Sean O'Brien is doing, right? I mean, Sean O'Brien promised he was going to call balls and strikes, and it's going to be very, you know, he's going to, I mean, Sean O'Brien promised that he was going to do what Shawn Fain is going to do, what Shawn Fain is doing. And I do not see what they're doing as comparable, frankly. So there you go. I had another clip where he was responding to some allegations of flip-flopping, but I think that we basically made the point there. And so let's dig into some more about the tariffs. Here is where he lays out the UAW's position on tariffs.
Here is our position as a union on tariffs and free trade. Number one, free trade has been a disaster for the working class, and we have to end these broken anti-worker policies. Number two, we can and should reshore tens of thousands of jobs in very short order, which would raise the standard for all workers. Strategic tariffs can play a role in that. Number three, the automakers, the auto market, and corporate America can't afford it. So let's get into the details on these tariffs. Right now, there are three main kinds of tariffs on the table. Some of these tariffs target entire countries. Some of these tariffs target specific industries. Big picture, we support some use of tariffs on auto manufacturing and other similar industries. We don't support the use of tariffs for political games about immigration or fentanyl. We do not support reckless, chaotic tariffs on all countries at crazy rates. We absolutely support and have always supported tariffs on the auto industry, on heavy truck, and on agricultural implements. The difference is the auto tariffs are designed for a specific purpose. They raise the cost on the companies that have killed good jobs in a race to the bottom for cheap labor elsewhere, while Wall Street makes a killing. Specifically, we have industries where right now there are active plants operating under capacity in the U.S. while workers outside the U.S. are exploited for $3 an hour.
And so he goes into that, and I was fascinated by how many jobs could be created really like that, like at the snap of your fingers. How much capacity within only the union automotive manufacturers is being underutilized. Let's take a look at what Shawn Fain says here.
We took a look at just a handful of Big Three plants. We wanted to look just at the recent past. We asked ourselves, how many more vehicles could we produce if we went back to the levels that those plants operated at just 10 years ago? And the answer is staggering. 10 years ago, 12 Big Three plants that are still in operation right now were producing over 2 million more vehicles every year. 2 million more vehicles per year. These plants still have that capacity right now. That's tens of thousands of jobs that we could bring back right now. Our research tells us that if the Big Three alone just got their currently active plants up to 100% capacity, they could add 50,000 jobs. Let me say that again. If they just used the plants that were already running and hired up to full capacity, we could add over 50,000 jobs at the Big Three alone. That's not even including closed plants like Lordstown Assembly in Ohio, which could bring thousands more jobs back. That's not including building new plants. And don't forget, for every 100 auto assembly jobs that are created in the United States, there are another 700 jobs created in the supply chain. 50,000 more jobs in the Big Three means hundreds of thousands of more jobs at parts suppliers and other businesses that support it. That's not even including non-union automakers. That's if we just stop letting the automakers get away with murder by running a race to the bottom under our broken trade deals.
That is astounding. You could see 50,000 new jobs if only the active Big Three automotive manufacturing plants went up to 100% capacity. That is huge. And again, like you said, that doesn't count for 40,000 new jobs that could be created at non-union facilities. That doesn't account for parts suppliers. That doesn't account opening closed plants like Lordstown. That doesn't count IPS and suppliers and stuff like that. And so lots of new jobs can be created at the drop of a hat if they, if they do it. If they just move some production back to the United States, where it was less than 10 years ago, right? And so you hear a lot about, they can't immediately respond. They can't immediately ramp up production. It takes years to build new factories. And it's like, well, actually, for a lot of it, you don't have to build new factories. You can just use what you have here. So that's really important for folks to recognize. Here are some other things that the UAW wants to see in a new trade deal.
I want to be clear about this. The Trump administration is the first administration in my lifetime that's been willing to do something about this broken free trade system. Tariffs are the first step. But we need to put out our vision for an auto industry that doesn't leave behind working class people. And then we need to fight like hell for it. In 2026, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA, which is the new rendition of NAFTA, is up for review. And in the last presidential election, the candidates from both the Democrat and Republican parties agreed we need to rewrite that deal. The fact is, under the USMCA, auto workers are still living under a race to the bottom. Mexican auto workers are still having their union rights trampled on. American auto workers are still under constant threat of plant closures. We want to sit down at the bargaining table and renegotiate the USMCA trade deal today. A new trade deal for North America should have a manufacturing minimum wage. Workers on two sides of a border should not have to compete with one another in a race to the bottom. A new trade deal for North America should make it so if you want to sell product in a country, you have to make a product in a country. That would be good for Canada, for the U.S., and for Mexico. A new trade deal should fix the race to the bottom in the supply chain also. We don't want our IPS members, who are just as essential to this industry, to be left behind. We need enforcement mechanisms to make sure that trade is tied to how these companies treat their workers. And we need a trade agreement that guarantees that labor rights are protected in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. So that's what we're fighting for. And already, dozens of members of Congress have called for renegotiating the USMCA. That's the first step.
And so I think, again, I'll reiterate that I think, people disagree with me, but I think that Shawn Fain is doing a really good job of threading this needle, of recognizing and pointing out that defending the status quo is not acceptable and is not going to be enough. And you do have to thread this needle. You do have to remind people that you as a leader recognize free trade has been a disaster. Trump is doing something to try to change it, and it is not enough, right? That's what you need to say, that it's not enough, and it's not going to, it's not going to, what he's doing, solve all of these problems. But you can't just be opposed to it, because then you are perceived as defending the status quo, which is how we got here. And so I'll wrap up here where Shawn Fain wrapped up, talking about how the free trade has the free trade disaster has resulted in what we're seeing right now. Let's listen to this.
No matter what party you voted for, understand this. There is a direct line between the free trade disaster and the political chaos in this country. Plant closures and mass layoffs resulted in intense pain and suffering and anger for hundreds of thousands of working families in our country. All that pain and anger had to go somewhere. A lot of it went to support Donald Trump for president. And now it's being directed at immigrants, at transgender people, at higher education. And that's the wrong target. The right target is corporate America. And the sooner both parties understand this, the sooner our country will begin to deal with our real issues. We need to build a political movement that can put the working class first. And to do that, we're going to need working class people to step up, to speak up, and take on corporate America, from the bargaining table to the ballot box. No matter who's on the other side of that table or in that office, we're going to have to stand up and stand strong with integrity on our issues.
So there you go. I think that Sean Fain, again, did a really good job threading this needle. And I think it's important to thread the needle. I don't think that you can just say tariffs bad because working people have had their lives destroyed by the free trade disaster. And we need to recognize that even if it's true, and it is, that Donald Trump's solution is not going to fix everything, we cannot just defend the status quo. So we're going to take a break really quick, and we'll come back and wrap up with Boss Watch. If you would like to call in, let us know your thoughts. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number. 844-899-8857. We'll take calls at 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern. If you'd like to call in, feel free to do so. Going to take a break. Be right back with Boss Watch. The Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama local workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact April at our training center to start the process at 256-904-1753. No experience is needed. We offer free training, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is our mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power. The Valley Labor Report is also supported by the Communication Workers of America. Learn more at cwa-union.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by the United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America, better known as the UAW. They are one of the largest and most diverse unions in North America, with members in virtually every sector of the economy. UAW-represented workplaces range from multinational corporations, small manufacturers, and state and local governments, to colleges and universities, hospitals, and private nonprofit organizations. The UAW has more than 400,000 active members and more than 580,000 retired members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. You can learn more about the UAW and join at uaw.org. The Valley Labor Report is also sponsored by Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement since 1979. You can learn more about Labor Notes at labornotes.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Union leaders, do you want a powerful website and mobile app built just for your members? The Union Active system, created by Unions America, makes it easy to share news and documents, send alerts, and keep your members engaged anytime, anywhere. Trusted by thousands of unions, Union Active streamlines communication so you can focus on what matters most, your members. With real-time updates, secure messaging, and custom features built for unions, you'll keep your members informed and engaged 24/7. Get Union Active today. Visit unionactive.com to learn more. Union Active, the ultimate website and communication system for unions.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report, the largest union radio talk program in the southern United States. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We got about 50-something people watching us on YouTube. If you haven't liked the stream, go ahead and do that. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We have, as always, Joe and Mel on the Facebook. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate all the comments in the chat from the last segment. Quirky Geek Girl says building more cars is not going to solve the larger environmental problem. That for a greener future, you need to invest in more public transit, high-speed rail, etc. That's absolutely true, and
good point.
It's a good point. I do think it's a separate point, right? Than the tariffs and the free trade and everything.
Well, I mean, I guess in the sense that we need those things to be built, and ideally they're built here at home, right? With good union jobs,
and,
local, right? Because I want Canadian transit built by Canadian workers. I want American transit built by American workers. It makes sense to keep the wealth flowing closer to home. But
and it shouldn't just be new cars that are built, but unfortunately, America has been built around the car, and it would take,
especially here in the South,
especially really anywhere, west of anywhere like west of Washington D.C. or west of Boston and south of North Carolina. I mean, it's terrible. We've done just a horrible thing by building our country around the car. And so that's that's just a whole other thing. But we, and like building more trains isn't, the train cars isn't going to be the thing that actually brings more public transit. It's going to take, real change at the local, state, and national level to really do public transit. But she made the point later in the chat, the younger generation wants transit instead of cars, and I count myself among that. I mean, I love, like, there was one time that I spent like a week or two in DC, and the whole the idea about cars, like the propaganda around cars, is that, oh, it's so freeing, right? You get so much freedom from the car. I have never felt like less constricted than I did, as far as like I can go wherever I want, than I did when I was in DC, and I could jump on the subway and be anywhere that I wanted in 30 minutes without having to drive, without having to find a place to park, without having to take my car, without having to, like I literally walk out of the hotel and then decide where I want to be in the next 30 minutes, and then I'm there. It's like, it's so nice, and being able to walk is nice. It's good for you. And I liked it, so yeah.
Right, and I'm not a bicycle guy, but I really appreciate those who bring up that point, being able to bike in terms of their commute and having bike-friendly cities and communities. So yeah, that's a whole really interesting conversation, and there's a whole element to it in terms of, the workforce participation and the economic growth that comes from having solid public transportation, right? Because it makes it easier for people to get to work, to go to doctor's appointments, to go to school. It makes it easier for folks to participate in the economy in all of those different ways, right? Because, you think about, especially here in Alabama or in many states like ours, where in so many communities, if something goes wrong with your car, your life is on hold.
Right.
Your life is on hold. You cannot get to work, and therefore, okay, well, now how are you going to pay to fix the car when I've got to go to work to make the money to fix the car? It can be a real barrier, and so that's something that weighs on me a lot, especially in rural communities where and you have, I was just talking to a union brother last night about some of these issues, and, we talked about how there's a lot of folks out there that are driving these, cars that are worth less than $5,000, right? And they're having to pay for the tag and title and registration, pay for the liability insurance. And by the time they do all that, it's worth, they're spending more than the car's really worth, but that's the only way they can get around. And, it just really, it is something that we have to be more intentional about, especially given the climate catastrophe we're in. We have to expand public transportation in a big, big way. But that is also, to kind of tie it back to this discussion, it is an opportunity to have domestically grown, really solid, good union jobs. We need that infrastructure. We need that equipment. We need all of the work that goes into that. So I know people like to make fun of the Green New Deal and, joke about that. But, if you look at the opportunity that we have, there's a huge need, and that is a huge opportunity. And we could put people to work all over this country, including in depressed, historically marginalized communities that don't have many jobs, like some of these rural areas where there's just not a lot of options. Let's put folks to work building out a robust 21st century public transit system.
Yeah. Boss Watch is a segment that we do every week where we take a look at what bosses were up to in the South. And OSHA has finally begun issuing press releases about enforcement again. The last press release that OSHA put out about enforcement was before Trump took office. So, geez, it was only 2.5 months ago. That's terrible. It's going to be a long 4 years. So here's what. In Georgia, a U.S. Department of Labor investigation found that improperly stored hazardous chemicals were the cause of a fire at a biolab incorporated facility in Conyers. The Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigation learned that the incident originated at a company warehouse that stored various chemicals. OSHA cited biolab for 4 serious and 2 other than serious violations and proposed $61,000 in penalties. The company has 15 business days to comply, request an informal conference with OSHA's area director, or contest the findings. OSHA's Chemical Hazards and Toxic Substances webpage includes information on standard requirements, hazard recognition, controlling worker exposure. In Missouri, the U.S. Department of Labor reached an agreement with Jamesport roofing contractor John Troyer after a federal investigation determined he violated federal laws, resulting in a teen worker's fatal fall in March 2023. The Department's Occupational Safety and Health Administration found that Troyer, owner of Troyer Construction LLP, which operates as Troyer Roofing and Coatings, failed to provide workers with required fall protection. A separate investigation by the department's Wage and Hour Division found he violated the Fair Labor Standards Act by employing minors illegally in roofing work from May 2022 to June 2023. Under the agreement, Troyer must pay $290,000, which includes $156,000 in OSHA penalties, $15,000 in child labor penalties, and $118,000 in criminal fines to the U.S. Department of Justice. The company will also enroll in Missouri's on-site safety and health consultation program. Union Busters, this segment of Boss Watch covering national updates, is sponsored by Labor Lab. Labor Lab is an employer watchdog organization. They are committed to safeguarding the right to organize through unions, collective bargaining, and mutual aid. They do this by combing through reports that union busters are required to file with the Department of Labor. Here are the new filings from last week. Arcosa in Michigan hired labor relations elevated for $212.50 an hour. Per the filing, they were subcontracted by LRI Consulting Services. They have not filed an LM20 yet. Newport Meat, Southern California, hired Action Resources for $3,700 a day. Rogue Disposal in Oregon hired Davis, Grimm, Payne, and Mara for $400 an hour. There is a union election open right now. Coregistics in Georgia hired LRI Consulting Services for $425 an hour. And ARO Construction Group in New York hired labor management consultants for $250 an hour. There is a union election ongoing. In addition, one filing was amended. Solutions Labor Relations Consulting added their compensation rate of $250 an hour at the LCP Group. Just a reminder, due to a lack of enforcement, some labor relations consultants may disregard the law and fail to report their activities to the U.S. Department of Labor. Therefore, it's crucial for organizers and workers to report suspected persuader activity to the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Labor Management Standards, OLMS. You can reach out to them by sending them an email at olms-public@dol.gov, by calling 202-693-0123, or by contacting your nearest OLMS district office. For assistance, you can contact Labor Lab at contact@laborlab.us. That's it for the first half of our program this week, folks. We really appreciate everybody tuning in. We are headed into overtime now. You can find us online, Facebook and YouTube, to keep listening to the program. If you don't do that, then we will see you next week. All right. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number, 844-899-8857 if you want to call in. I'm going to take a break. We'll be right back with Overtime.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell. Go to Harlan County, there is no neutral air. You'll either be a union man or a thug party explorer. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
This is Overtime, a production of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio program and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending some time with us today. If you'd like to call in, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. Let's take a look at some more comments. We got a lot. Appreciate y'all for participating in the chat. Brandon Hill says, God damn, I would vote for that man. I would vote for Sean Fain too, for sure. He's great. And he said, further, thank you guys for playing that. I didn't understand why the UAW was taking the position it did on the tariffs, and I hadn't had the chance to watch Fain's talk. A nuanced take helped me understand. And yeah, you know, I think that I do think that a genuinely good faith person can come to a different, like, strategic position than Sean Fain did. But I think that where Sean Fain is at is coming from a place of good faith, and he's doing a good job of like I said, threading the needle. So, hopefully that was helpful for some folks. Quirky Geek Girl says the map of high-speed trains in China compared to 15 years ago is amazing. Yeah, it is. It really is. China's doing a lot. They're doing a lot of good stuff, I think.
Well, be careful saying that.
Yeah, it could get me deported. Crazy.
Mm.
Let's see. I enjoy driving, but I loathe finding parking. I actually, Dr. Mad said that. I like neither, but I particularly hate finding parking, and it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, especially in densely populated areas like downtowns and where there's just not a lot of parking, and then it's such a ripoff too. I took my family to Chattanooga recently, and just finding parking, and then you spend $20 for an hour or some ridiculous rate. I know they do that at concerts. That's a big one too.
The urbanists would say that actually it's still probably in most cities too cheap, because the goal of like parking prices in the urbanist way of thinking, I'm not totally sure what's right, but in their way of thinking, it's not actually like to generate revenue. You don't actually want to generate. It's to dissuade people from using parking and to get them using public transit instead.
Right.
And that allows you, and by dissuading people, you can take some of the parking and make it even more, scarce of a product, and further push more people into public transit. That would be their argument.
Yeah, I understand it.
Brandon says, I'm working with Teamsters and want to be a dues-paying member, but man, I wish O'Brien was way more like Fain. I feel like O'Brien is playing politics and Fain is actually representing the workers. Yeah, I agree. Quirky Geek Girl says, whenever I bike or take transit somewhere to meet someone with a car, I always get there first because I don't have to deal with traffic or find parking. Yep, that's true. Austin Fan for Life. Jacob, Article 1 only sets a maximum amount of funds by Congress. It does not set a minimum. Nothing in Article 1 or Article 2 says the executive has to spend the maximum amount of funds. Well, that's not what we were talking about. The reason that I referenced Article 1 was that Congress gets to decide what is spent and how it is spent, and I was referencing that specifically with respect to protections for workers that Congress set. So those being the reduction in force procedures, those being protections against firing for board officials at the National Labor Relations Board and the Merit Systems Protections Board. And in the National Labor Relations Act, it specifically says that board members cannot be fired but for like negligence and stuff, right? So Congress expected a situation where board members would be overlapping with presidents of the opposing party, and they set that, and the Supreme Court 100 years ago in Humphrey's Executor said that is okay, and in lots of Supreme Court cases since then, they have reaffirmed that basic decision. And so I'm not even talking here because, this Austin Fan for Life must be a big Trump guy, and he must have heard me disagree with Trump, and then he just heard me disagree with Trump, and then he said, oh, I'm thinking of something else, and now I'm going to respond to the something else that was not said. I'm not even responding to the argument about grants or programs or anything like that. I'm saying Congress has set protections for the civil service that should be respected. Congress has set protections for board members of independent agencies that should be respected because of Article 1. But Austin Fan for Life, didn't hear that. He heard me criticizing Daddy Trump and said something else. Dr. Mad said, the tough thing is that O'Brien was the compromise candidate for the Teamsters Reform Caucus, so you get what you get. That's true. A lot of people don't realize this either, but Sean O'Brien is not a TDU guy. Teamsters for a Democratic Union, the Reform Caucus within the Teamsters. Sean O'Brien was actually a fierce opponent of the TDU for a long time before he publicly broke with the Hoffa regime. And so Sean O'Brien, not a TDU guy, was very antagonistic towards them for a very long time. Palace says, I would love to live in the middle of nowhere, but it is a hell of a convenience to have so many things close by in case things go wrong. Yeah, indeed. I have lived both, like 45 minutes from civilization, like way out in the country, and right in the middle of downtown, and living in the middle of downtown I like it way better. Let's see.
Yeah, I like a lot about, the rural lifestyle. I do like, the just being out in the country and having some of that space and freedom. But man, is it an inconvenience.
Yeah, huge inconvenience.
Every time there's just, you need something, right? Groceries, medicine, you name it. It is just a major inconvenience, and it's a real tough thing. And, something that I think a lot of workers are dealing with are these long commutes. It's not something we talk about a whole lot, but it kind of connects to both the rural living and as well as the transit conversation, because so many people are commuting 30, 45, 60 minutes or more. There are people who, work in the Huntsville area that are coming from over an hour away. And that's pretty common. A lot of the folks who live in some of the surrounding counties around Madison County here in the Tennessee Valley, they're making that long commute. And, you think about an hour and a half, 2 hours of your day every day, that's just gone. Yeah. While, and you're having to pollute the environment. You're having to spend your own hard-earned money to do that. And so that's something else that I think is a factor when you start looking at these issues, because, in a lot of communities, there's just not a lot of jobs to go to. There's just not a lot of options. And so, maybe you're in a type of career where remote work is a possibility, though that's, clearly under attack in many industries, particularly in the public sector. But, maybe you have that opportunity, but if not, it can be really tough to find a decent job that's close by and where you can actually, have a decent lifestyle. It's a really tough barrier that a lot of folks, in the South in particular are dealing with.
Right. Doodle Cupcake says, how much of a lack of public transit is also a function of a fascist/authoritarian society? The less people can get around, the more isolated and alone they are. And that's interesting that you brought that up, because that's actually been, I don't know how much of like a purposeful thing that is, but I do think that there's like a correlation there that I've read about in like analysis of union campaigns and stuff, and particularly, attempts to organize non-union automakers in the South, because that is such a common experience for auto workers in the South, driving, 50 minutes, 45, 30 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to get to your job. And so they're not really being like places of, like public places like people just walk to from the job. And so that's actually been something that the UAW has identified as something that makes it more difficult to organize in the South, is how dispersed everybody is, and how there's not like a central location, and how that does make it easy to be atomized.
Right, absolutely. I mean, and just on a practical level, the hour that they spend in the car is an hour that they're not around their coworkers at the neighborhood pub or restaurant or at church or wherever. And so, yeah, I think that absolutely is a barrier that a lot of folks are dealing with. The geographic disbursement, the long commute times, the relative isolation of folks. Yeah, you know, we've talked about that before on the show, and how really in a lot of ways, labor organizing in today's environment, you're having to build a lot of belonging and just relationship connections, and just get people talking to each other and spending time with each other. I mean, that's a big hurdle.
We've got Jordan Barab on the line now. He's calling in from a 301 area code, so we'll go ahead and bring him on the air. Jordan Barab is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. He is now the proprietor of Confined Space, a newsletter on labor and workplace safety. Jordan Barab, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure, happy to be here.
Really do appreciate it, and appreciate you having taken some time with me off the air a while back to talk to me about some of this stuff. And I want to start off with a pretty basic sort of level-setting question, which is, what is OSHA, MSHA, and NIOSH? What do they do? Why are they important? Why should people care about it?
Okay, so OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. MSHA is the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. MSHA was created in the late 1960s to protect miners on the job, mostly coal miners, obviously, who are vulnerable to explosions and cave-ins and black lung disease. OSHA was created in 1970, passed by Congress in 1970, with the mission to assure the health and safety of all American workers, aside, obviously, from the mine workers who were covered by MSHA. Now, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health was created as part of the Occupational Safety and Health Act to do research into health and safety conditions, both in mines as well as in general industry. They do an enormous amount of research. They do a lot of educational materials. They propose models for OSHA standards, and they also provide a lot of money around the country to educate health and safety professionals, from industrial hygienists all the way up to occupational safety and health physicians. So it's an extremely important, very small agency, only about $300 million budget, very small agency, but very important in terms of the overall health and safety of American workers in this country.
Yes, $300 million budget is like $1 per worker, right? So that's that's not very much. And you know,
no, it's not very much at all. No.
Many folks think that, or actually, it's not $1 per worker; it's $1 per citizen, something like $2 per worker, because there are less workers than residents. Anyway, many people think that workplace safety regulations are too stringent, and that's kind of the theory of Doge. That's the theory of the few remaining supporters of this Doge project, and it's that it's so hard to be an employer in America with respect to all the rules they have to follow. And so, you know, people that kind of subscribe to that idea, and there are workers that subscribe to that idea that it's too hard to be an employer, you know, they may not be too worried about OSHA getting slashed. And so before we talk into specifically what's happening at OSHA and MSHA and NIOSH, you know, I want to ask you why they're wrong. And one example that I have is, you know, there's some local business owners that did a podcast here for a short amount of time, and they talked to us about how they presented this argument basically that, oh, it's so hard being a business owner. You know, if somebody got hurt on my job, I might go to jail. And, you know, I had the displeasure of telling them that they almost certainly would, not only would they not go to jail, almost certainly, they would probably not have to pay any fines either if somebody got hurt on their job, you know, with the lax labor relations that we have, or labor regulations that we have. And so, you know, why are folks like that wrong, that we don't have too many regulations with respect to workplace safety and health and things like that?
Yeah, well, we actually have far too few regulations that oversee worker safety and health. I mean, every time OSHA or MSHA proposes a new health and safety standard, the affected industry, cries out that it's going to cause, mass unemployment, mass bankruptcy. The sky's falling, but that never happens. And that's partly because they exaggerate the costs of it, but also because they don't look at the benefits. So, maybe a company has to invest in some ways, training and other equipment to make their workplace safer. But the fact is, you're saving lives and you're preventing injuries. And if you look at the cost of a lost time injury or the cost of a worker's death, that always far exceeds the amount of money that the employers have to invest in making their workplace safe. So if you want to look at the costs and benefits, there are enormous benefits to health and safety regulation in terms of preventing costly, obviously painful and tragic worker injuries, illnesses, and death. So again, it's all a myth, and there've been study after study, showing that workplace safety and health regulation pays off, and that employers who actually are serious about having a safe workplace are actually much more profitable than employers who cut corners on safety and health.
Right. And just as another Alabama example, the Washington Post had a recent profile of a lumber mill that was deemed the deadliest workplace in America, and it didn't get shut down because OSHA doesn't have that authority, right? Are you familiar with this case?
Yeah, Phoenix Lumber, yes, in Phoenix, Alabama. Yeah, this was a good case. This was a relatively small employment, I think 50 people, and yet, every year there are dozens of employees that got seriously injured, and they over the 10 years, also 4 horrible fatalities, including one person that fell into a running auger, and basically only small pieces of him came out. OSHA cited this company millions of dollars. Normally OSHA, OSHA's fines are very low, but because of the egregious behavior of this company over the years, OSHA managed to assemble penalties that reached into the millions of dollars, but it didn't really change the behavior of the employer. The employer continued on without paying, and OSHA, as you mentioned, OSHA has no authority to shut down a company. They can't tell a company, sorry, you're too unsafe, you've killed too many people, we're shutting you down. OSHA does have a very narrow authority to shut down certain operations if they present an imminent danger. If somebody's in a trench, that's 10 feet deep, OSHA can, get them out and shut down the operation there. But normally OSHA can't shut down operations. They can't shut down businesses. All they can do is issue normally very low penalties. And OSHA is so small that it can't even get to most workplaces. It can get only to a very small number of workplaces every year, which means unfortunately a lot of OSHA citations are reactive. In other words, they only come after a worker is hurt or killed rather than before.
Right. We've seen some OSHA citations for deaths where the employer was, like if the employer had behaved and had done the training and done the things that they ought to do, somebody would still be here, right? That is what happens when employers don't follow safety regulations, and the fines for that can be like as low as $16,000. The idea that OSHA's power is so great over employers is just so absurd, because exactly like you said, so much of what OSHA does is reactive, and the AFL-CIO, which is the labor federation in the United States, they put out a death on the job report every year around Workers' Memorial Day, so we should be getting a new one here pretty soon, but they point out every year, and it's always basically the same, that it would take nearly 200 years for OSHA inspectors to visit each workplace in America once, just one time, just to visit them, not to do a big whole huge investigation, just to be there in person and observe. Almost 200 years, and who knows how long it would be now that the Doge cuts have happened. But what does that do for their ability, or why should we have an OSHA that is proactive? Like, why would it be a good thing if we had an OSHA that was well-funded and well-staffed enough that they could not only react to things, but they could do like proactive sorts of things?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you say, it takes almost 200 years if OSHA wanted to visit every workplace once. And what that means is that any given employer is very unlikely to ever see an OSHA inspector unless somebody in their workplace is killed or seriously injured, or the rare conditions where a worker actually files a complaint without fearing retaliation. So again, most employers aren't going to ever see an OSHA inspector. So if you're not going to see one, why should? And you're inclined to cut corners on safety. Why should you care? I mean, it would be like, you've got traffic, speed limits on the street, 55 miles an hour, or 30 miles an hour. But if you will almost never have a chance of getting a ticket, what's to keep you from actually speeding or breaking other traffic laws? The threat of enforcement that is a deterrent. Unfortunately, for many employers who would want to cut corners on safety and health. I mean, there are a lot of employers out there who want to do the right thing, but unfortunately, there are a lot that don't. And would rather save money by trying to shortcut basic health and safety standards, and that's what we saw at the the Phoenix lumber mill that you mentioned. It cost them too much. When something broke, it cost them too much to shut down the whole line. They didn't want to do preventive maintenance, so they had people actually trying to fix the machines while they were running, and consequently, people were killed, lost limbs, and were ground up in these machinery because the employer was not complying with basic health and safety standards.
And just to go back to that for one more moment, I mean, multiple people died, multiple limbs lost, fingers lost, things like that. But the thing that actually finally ended up shutting it down was that they were stealing a little bit of water from the city, or it was either water or electricity. They had somehow bypassed the normal thing, and they were taking water from the city or electricity, and so the city shut it down over the safety stuff, but they had the authority to do that because of the theft that was going on. And so it's easier for a city to shut down an employer over water violations than it is for OSHA to stop companies from killing people. I mean, that's how weak OSHA is. And so, when you were at OSHA, I'm curious what the, what was the most frustrating kind of limitation for you and also for, the rank and file in OSHA inspectors? What was some of the most frustrating kind of limitations on your authority at OSHA?
Well, there were a lot of frustrations when I was at OSHA, but you're right. I mean, in terms of enforcement, it is the low penalties. The fact that there are certain conditions, the maximum penalties are low, and then there are a lot of reasons that they end up the penalties end up being much lower even than the maximums. The fact that we didn't have standards that covered a lot of basic issues. I mean, heat, workplace violence, ergonomics. And it takes OSHA, 10 to 20 years to issue standards. That was extremely frustrating. But also, just looking at the political situation, I mean, the attacks from the business community and Republicans in Congress, were extremely frustrating as well, because I mean, they know perfectly well that workers are getting killed for preventable causes, but they're just doing the bidding of business. Again, who are crying, that the sky is falling because OSHA is issuing either too many standards, or if God forbid OSHA is enforcing the law, then they're being confrontational, right, instead of cooperative. Unfortunately, we'd all like to be cooperative, and we'd all like to have voluntary safety and health, but not everyone volunteers to have a safe workplace. So unfortunately, like every part of life, you need laws, you need enforcement, you need standards to ensure that workers are safe in the workplace.
Right. And so, moving up to today, what has Trump done so far in terms of cuts to OSHA, MSHA, and NIOSH?
Okay, well, that's a good question, and we're unfortunately there's still a lot to be seen. Probably the most serious thing he did was pretty much eliminate NIOSH, and this again, NIOSH, National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, is the agency that does the research, education, and provides basically the pipeline for future OSHA professionals. they pretty much eliminated it, except for a few parts that deal with veterans of nuclear war, or the nuclear industry that were exposed, and World Trade Center workers who are inhaled the toxic dust. Pretty much everything else in NIOSH is gone, which means there's an enormous amount of expertise and work on mine safety. A lot of issues that NIOSH handles are areas where OSHA doesn't have standards. Again, like heat. NIOSH was the first agency to really develop heat standards that protected workers, although they were voluntary in their guidelines. It's not mandatory until OSHA actually issues a standard. So anyway, that's NIOSH, pretty much gone at this point, among all the other cuts that were done at the Department of Health and Human Services. In terms of MSHA and OSHA, we haven't seen a whole lot yet. The administration is threatening to close down some offices, which will make enforcement much harder. Inspectors will have to travel a lot further in order to get to workplaces. We've seen they just suspended the temporarily, they say, but they suspended the enforcement of MSHA's new silica standard, and this is something that prevented, after a long time, and this was just issued recently during the Biden administration, but that prevented a particularly severe form of black lung that this is not just caused by coal dust, but also by silica in the mines, and has caused enormous rise in the incidence of black lung disease, and a particularly severe form of black lung disease because of the silica, and a form of black lung disease that is also hitting young miners. So miners that may have started in their 20s. By the time they're in their 30s or 40s, they can't breathe. They need lung transplants. And he just suspended the enforcement of that. Ironically, because they weren't sure of the kind of respirators that would be available, because another thing that NIOSH did, which is now being eliminated, is to certify respirators. So basically, the Trump administration, gets rid of the respirator certification program and then uses as an excuse to stop enforcing the silica standard.
Right.
And
OSHA,
just
to underscore really quick the silica rule, about 15 years ago, 1 in 30 coal miners who had been mining for 20 years had gotten black lung. And black lung is basically a death sentence. There's not a cure. It's just a matter of postponing your death, which is going to come by, basically strangulation. I mean, it's a very, very scary disease. And now that number is 1 in 5. 1 in 5 coal miners who have been mining for 20 years now are getting black lung. I mean, that is a huge increase in the incidence rate of this disease. And we know what's causing it because of NIOSH, and we know how to stop it. And the Trump administration is standing in the way.
Yeah, and the other thing NIOSH did was pretty much provide free health care to workers suffering from black lung in terms of health examinations, in terms of monitoring their health, figuring out ways to ease their suffering. This was all done by NIOSH, and all of that is now gone. Not only the treatment of workers, but any kind of the records. I mean, the statistics you're talking about were all kept by NIOSH. All of that is now gone. So anyway, OSHA, back to OSHA. OSHA, we haven't seen too much yet. They have been threatening to shut down some offices, as I said, but we haven't really seen too much coming out of the Department of Labor that will impact OSHA yet. But they just offered more early retirement with a deadline in a couple of weeks, and we're expecting some pretty drastic downsizing, reorganization, layoffs after that. But again, OSHA is already so small. As you said, they can only reach a few workplaces every year anyway. It takes them decades sometimes to issue standards. OSHA is already so small and ineffective that any kind of cuts are going to be catastrophic for the agency, and unfortunately for the health and safety of American workers as well.
Right. And so can you talk some more about what effect this is going to have on their ability to execute the mission? I don't know if you saw this, but last week OSHA, I think for the first time since the Trump administration came in, they issued a couple of press releases about enforcement actions that they were doing, and so that's about the same timeline as the first administration. It took several weeks before the Trump administration started enforcing workplace safety law again. And so for OSHA, do you think that we're gonna see something like maybe a return to a mean here, or are you anticipating more cuts? And then for NIOSH and MSHA, these office closures and basically the decimation of NIOSH, 2/3 of their staff, what effect is that going to have on their ability to execute the mission?
Well, yeah, I mean, OSHA already has a hard time executing its mission. At least MSHA is required to inspect every coal mine 4 times a year. There's no such requirement for OSHA to get to any workplaces at any schedule. So, I mean, the fact that, right now they can only reach every workplace about once every 200 years, any cuts will make that much, much worse. OSHA will, Republicans traditionally, and I'm sure this administration as well, don't issue any new standards. So right now, OSHA was working on a heat standard to protect workers against high heat that's killing more and more workers every year. Workplace violence standard and infectious disease standards, all of these things are going to grind to a halt. But if they start laying people off, or if Congress in the next budget negotiations start cutting OSHA's budget, we're going to see an agency that already struggles becoming, almost totally ineffective in terms of protecting workers. And employers know that, so they know that there would be even a less chance of an OSHA inspector ever showing up in their workplace. Even if somebody gets hurt or killed. So without OSHA, all the guardrails will be gone. Except there are one exceptions. There are 21 states that run their own OSHA programs. They have to be at least as effective as federal OSHA. About half of those states have Democratic governors or legislators, and they can actually go above and beyond what OSHA is doing. But they get 50% of their funding from federal OSHA. And again, if they cut OSHA's budget, then even the state plan states are going to start suffering in terms of their ability to protect workers in their states.
So why couldn't OSHA just be more efficient? I mean, we hear every year that the AFL puts out their report that it'd take nearly 200 years to visit each workplace once. Well, why don't they just do it faster? Why can't they do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to be more efficient when you have, I mean, the line is always, we're going to do more with less. But anybody that knows organizations, especially federal government organizations, knows that you do less with less. I mean, these agencies like OSHA are already strained to the bone. I mean, there is no extra, staff power there. There are no extra employees just wandering around, waiting for things to do. Again, they've already been cut to the bone. Same with NIOSH. I mean, if you look at the things that NIOSH did on that tiny, tiny budget, I mean, you'd be amazed at how actually efficient and effective these agencies are, considering their low staffing levels and low budgets. So you have agencies here that have basically been, I mean, OSHA hasn't had a decent, budget increase since 2010. They pretty much had a flat budget, and combined with inflation, that essentially means they've already been getting cut every year. The standards budget, the enforcement budget, in real dollars, they're all significantly lower than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even during the Reagan administration. They're much lower than during the Reagan administration, believe it or not. So any further cuts in that, again, will totally decimate any ability in this country to enforce safe and healthy working conditions.
Yeah, I mean, when you say much lower, I mean, you're not kidding. I think that I saw that it's literally like half of the staff of OSHA under Reagan is what we have right now. Something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
and we have obviously...
No, go ahead.
And with a much, much larger economy, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. There are much more people working than there were under Reagan, and we have half of the workplace safety inspectors. And I said that to somebody with reference to another organization within the government, and he was like, "Yeah, well, they didn't have computers back then, so you can so why can't why can't you just do all of this with computers?"
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess you could put a computer in one of Elon Musk's self-driving cars and drive it out to a workplace to, run around and eject a robot to go inspect the workplace. But I don't think that's going to be happening anytime soon. You actually need real inspectors who hopefully are paid a decent amount of money, because they're highly trained and highly skilled, to walk around these workplaces and identify hazards and talk to workers and talk to the employers and determine, what needs to be done to make these workplaces safe. Unfortunately, I mean, you can do targeting with computers, you can do a lot of stuff with computers, but you can't inspect a workplace with a computer.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you said, you mentioned hopefully they would be paid well, and unfortunately the reality is that by and large they're not paid as well as they should be, certainly, and they're not paid comparable to as much as you would for like comparable experience and education in the private sector. We actually had some NIOSH employees on last week, and during our interview they got a text from a NIOSH engineer who had been laid off, who already has an offer from the private sector to work for double. I mean, literally a 100% raise has come in within 48 hours of him being fired, but he doesn't want to take it because he wants to work for the American people and he wants to keep American workers safe instead of taking this big fat, juicy paycheck from the private sector. And so, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about these federal bureaucrats. They're like people who are giving up significantly more money in the private sector to serve you.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I spent a fair amount of time now in the federal government, and I've never seen, more dedicated workers than I have there. I mean, these are, as you say, these are people that aren't working for the money. They're working because they have a mission in life, and that mission in life is to help workers. But that was a problem we always had at OSHA. I mean, we had a high level of turnover, especially for the highly specialized jobs. I mean, those inspectors that, inspect, oil refineries and chemical plants, have a very high skill level. And it was hard holding on to those people because the industry would come in and, not offer them double. They'd offer them 3, 4, 5 times what they were making at OSHA.
Wow.
Which is hard. You got a family. It's
right.
hard to turn that type of thing down. And of course, now they're being, now they're just being laid off. And, so yeah, some of them won't have a problem finding a much higher paid job, but that's not why they're doing this job. They're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do for this country.
Right. And so what are some of the things that you're hearing from inside these agencies and from outside? As in, are there folks that are reaching out to you that have been saying, we've been trying to, I'm a worker and I've tried to report my employer and I'm not hearing anything back from OSHA. What are you hearing inside and outside?
Yeah, all right. So inside OSHA and inside these agencies, I mean, obviously the workers, the ones who haven't been laid off yet, are terrified about what's coming down the line. Very intimidated, very, very reluctant to stick their necks out on anything. I mean, when you're running an agency, you've got all this career staff there who have been there for years, and they don't always. We came in and we got a lot of changes we wanted to make. They aren't always in favor of those changes, but they'll go along with it. But they're particularly valuable in telling you things like, okay, you want to get from here to there. Well, the way you want to do it isn't going to work. I'll tell you a better way, more effective way to do it without the unintended consequences. But if you're afraid to speak up because you're going to be fired, those agencies just aren't going to run as well. In terms of outside the agencies, in terms of workers, complaining, I haven't heard much yet. I haven't really been able to hear much yet about what's going on in the field in terms of inspections. It's very hard, again, even for me, I still have friends in the agency, to get people to talk because, again, they are so terrified. A lot of the citations that, like you mentioned, that are still, the ones that we know about that are still being issued, these are all from inspections, that happened during the Biden administration. So we haven't really seen the data yet on what is happening in terms of enforcement during the Trump administration. But obviously, most Republican administrations, they keep doing enforcement more or less. I mean, the penalties are lower. If they cut staff, obviously the number of inspections are lower. The severity of penalties are less. They don't do as many what they call general duty clause citations, which are citations for hazards for which there are no OSHA standards. So that's a normal thing you see under Republican administrations, and it's still a bit too early to see how this Trump administration is impacting actual enforcement in the field.
Right. Well, we'll definitely keep an eye on it, and I know that you will too. As we're wrapping up, I want to talk about your newsletter a little bit. It's called Confined Space. You can find it at it's jordanbarab.com/confined space, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I've been doing it off and on for about 20 years now. So.
Well, it is a great resource. I think I found it like a couple of years ago, but I never really dug into it. And I started digging into it a couple of weeks ago or a month ago or so, whenever we talked. And it is a great resource. Lots of news and articles about workplace safety and things that are coming out from the Trump administration. And you also have a regular newsletter kind of in the vein of what we've been doing with Boss Watch, but Boss Watch, we've been primarily relying on press releases from OSHA and the Wage and Hour Division and MSHA and things like that. And what you've been doing is you've just been finding, it's called the weekly toll, and you just try to find every workplace death in the last week that you can, and you put it all in one newsletter. How do you go about doing that, and what made you want to do a newsletter like that?
Well, the reason I wanted to do it is because, workers these days, generally workers aren't killed. Well, let me put it this way. Workplace death doesn't usually appear in the media unless there are 5 or 10 workers that are killed at one time and then through an explosion, and then you might have a few days of articles. Most workers are just killed one at a time. Nobody notices, nobody hears about it. Nobody really cares except for their friends and family and coworkers. And yet, more than 5,000 workers are killed on the job every year. About 20 times that many are killed from occupational disease, and nobody knows this. So this is a way not only to make sure people know about workers who are getting killed in the workplace, how they're getting killed in the workplace, but I also try to put their names in because people should know, who these people are, who their families are, and also that a lot of, most of these could have been prevented. Now, I depend basically on just doing Google searches. I've got 100 and something Google searches out there. Yet I only actually collect something like 25 incidents a week. And yet somewhere around 100 workers are killed every week on the job, believe it or not. 100 workers are killed. Imagine if an airliner with 100 people crashed every single week in the country, what the response would be. But anyway, about 100 workers are killed every week on the job. I get about 20 of those. I think I do a pretty good job of media searches. So what that means is that, probably over half of the workers killed on the job in this country, never even show up in the media, never show up in the paper. Nobody even knows about it. Which is also kind of a tragedy in and of itself. But I do try to, I think it's important for Americans to know what's happening to workers in this country. I think it's, important for them to know their sacrifice, and I think it's important for people to know their names.
Right. And over the years of doing this specific newsletter, the Weekly Toll, as part of your broader Confined Space project, are there any kind of like patterns or like things that you have noticed from like similarities or differences or just revelations that you've had from compiling this for so long?
Well, there are a lot of deaths that OSHA doesn't really cover. There's a lot of deaths that occur on the highways, truck drivers, people like that, which aren't really covered by anybody. Nobody, they're kind of exempted from OSHA because they're covered by DOT, but DOT, the Department of Transportation, doesn't do a whole lot. There are a lot of workers who are killed, shot to death basically in retail stores, especially those that are open all night. And again, nobody, the cops do investigate that, obviously. OSHA doesn't really. So there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't investigated. And then you have the things that just make my blood boil. One of the things that makes my blood boil are trench collapses because they're very strict OSHA regulations that no worker can go down into a trench more than 5 feet deep without shoring up that trench or using a trench box. And yet, every couple of weeks we see another worker, sometimes more. We just had 2 in Baltimore that are killed in trench collapse, perfectly preventable, and there's really no construction employer in this country that doesn't know about the hazards of trenches. People falling off of buildings. I take my dogs for a walk all the time, and there are always workers on top of buildings without wearing fall protection. And every week, there's at least one and usually more workers who are killed by falling off of buildings because they aren't wearing fall protection. The employers just aren't supplying it or training workers on how to use it. So all of these things, especially the perfectly preventable ones, again, just infuriate me every week. OSHA just isn't big enough, to get to every little neighborhood, to find, to locate workers who are on top of roofs or down in trenches. I've done a lot of calls to OSHA, just walking the dogs when I see things, and they'll usually come out. But how many people know enough to do that or are going to do that? Right. And OSHA just isn't really. If everybody called in every worker they saw on top of a roof without fall protection, OSHA wouldn't even be able to handle that.
Right. Well, Jordan Barab, I've really appreciated the time. You're a great resource. Really recommend folks checking out your newsletter, jordanbarab.com/confined space. Is there anything else that you would want to leave our audience with before we let you go?
Well, yeah, we're unfortunately we're still at the beginning of the Trump administration. We've already seen some devastating impact on just labor in general, and specifically workplace safety and health. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to come. It's imperative that people talk to their legislators, Republicans and Democrats. Even Republicans need to know that there are workers, their constituents in their districts that are dying, and that dying from preventable causes. We need to educate them. We need to educate our local politicians. We need to obviously organize more unions, because ultimately, having a union is your best protection against being exploited or being killed in the workplace. We will have elections coming up at some point. Hopefully the damage won't be too bad there, but it's important, again, to support people who support workers, and particularly who support workplace safety.
All right. Jordan Barab, author or proprietor of the Confined Space newsletter, jordanbarab.com/confined space, former OSHA official. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right. Happy to be here, and happy to do it again.
All right. If anybody else wants to get where Jordan was, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That's 844-899-8857. We got a few more topics that we wanted to get to today. Let's talk about this Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, of course, folks know, Maryland father who was deported to the El Salvador prison labor concentration camp. Just real insane facility. He was deported there despite the government specifically having had a do not release to El Salvador order. Like there was a specific order to not send this guy to El Salvador, and they did it anyway. The administration has admitted that it was an administrative error, shouldn't have happened. And now the Supreme Court has said that the Trump administration has to facilitate his being brought back home. And so that is obviously very welcome news. Hopefully he will be let go and let out of custody completely and be able to go back to his job building America. This is a guy who worked for the sheet metal union, was an apprentice, literally building this country, and the thanks that he got for it was, we're going to send you to a prison labor camp. Just absolutely disgusting stuff coming out about this brother. Allegations without any sort of proof of him being in an MS-13 gang member. There are lots of instances of ICE officials and things like that lying about stuff like this, police officers lying about stuff like that, lying about evidence. But no evidence has even been presented that this guy is a gang member at all. It's just been asserted, and a really, really gross kind of stuff. And I am, very, very confident about the falsity of that allegation because of how strong the building trades unions have come out in support of their brother. This is the president of North America's building trade unions, Sean McGarvey, speaking at their legislative conference last week about this issue. Let's play that.
We need to make our voices heard. We're not red, we're not blue. We're the building trades, the backbone of America. We built a $5 billion, you want to build a $5 billion data center? Want more six-figure careers with health care retirement and no college debt? You don't call Elon Musk, you call us. North America's building trades unions. And yeah, that means all of us, including our brother, smart apprentice, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who we demand to be returned to us and his family now. Bring him home.
very strong messaging from the building trades there. A standing ovation for the calls to bring this brother home. And I just want to underscore for people in the audience that don't know very much about internal union politics, and it's normal that you wouldn't. You know, people have this idea about unions and the union leadership as, you know, Democrat toadies, and they do everything that the Democrats want them to do, and they're super partisan and all of this kind of stuff. The building trades are not that way. Like, whatever the truth value of that assessment of other union leaders, the building trades are certainly not that. The building trades are not super Democrat, super liberal, sort of assortment of unions. They're very, very much more conservative than the rest of the labor movement. And even at this convention, they had several Republican politicians speaking at this convention. And so, you know, even still, there's not like a full break with the Republican Party, but there is a real, you know, I mean, but this is really strong messaging from a group of unions that were even wanting to have a constructive relationship with the Trump administration only a month ago. And we know that because there was a leaked memo that Labor Notes put out that was from the internal NABTU. Like it was a memo to Sean McGarvey from one of their government affairs people about their work and negotiations and discussions with the Trump administration. And as part of this memo, they had a full page about a list of tactics that NABTU has leveraged in the first 30 days of the Trump administration to try and establish a productive and working relationship with the Trump administration. Without a request from the White House, they released congratulatory statements on the inauguration of Trump and Vance. They released statements of support for several cabinet nominees: the Department of Labor, the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Department of Transportation. I would not agree with all of those congratulatory statements, but the NABTU did it. They also released a statement praising the National Energy Dominance Council, okay? They remained silent as hundreds of thousands of future job hours were canceled with the pause of offshore wind leases. They remained silent as funding was paused for a cancer screening program for building trades members funded by the Department of Energy. They remained silent as the Department of Transportation removed preferences for raise grants to be awarded to applicants that utilize project labor agreements, as an NLRB member was fired along with the general counsel as Doge went into the Department of Labor. They noted specifically that NABTU declined to join the AFL's lawsuit when asked. They remained silent as the federal government attorneys announced agreement with 90-day pause to review new prevailing wage rules and about the PLA executive order exemption for Department of Defense projects. They also have been responsive to White House requests for information. They have repeatedly indicated to U.S. Senate and House members about our commitments to work with the Trump administration, and they turned away countless quote requests from reporters to criticize President Trump or his actions. Okay, so this is not right. This is a group of unions that are desperate to be given an excuse to be able to work with Republicans. This is a group of unions that would love nothing more than to be able to go to their conservative members and say, look at how close we are with the Trump administration. This is a group of unions that would love nothing more than to be openly pro-Republican, frankly, right? They just need an excuse to do that, and the Trump administration is refusing to do that. The Trump administration and Republicans generally just cannot seem to make themselves give unions even a little bit. Even the unions that want to work with them, they just can't seem to bring themselves to give them a little bit, when that's all that the unions are asking for is a little bit. Right? And so this really strong messaging on the immigration issue, which is a very controversial sort of thing, is out of character for the building trades unions, right? So I'm very confident that if they had even a small amount of inclination that this guy was an MS-13 member, they would not be doing this, right? And they would be, and this guy is a smart apprentice. This guy has, the local union officials with the sheet metal union, the local officials with the local building trades council, all of these people who have to work with this guy, who have worked with this guy day in and day out. They would have some sort of inclination if this guy is a gang member. And they would have communicated that to their leadership if that was the case, right? And so I'm very, very confident because of that all of these allegations are just nonsense. So that's very strong messaging from the building trades unions, and excited to hear that. There's another immigration story, again, where unions are coming out very strongly against the deportation sort of stuff. There's a good article in Labor Notes. Kentucky unions stand up to halt deportation of 200 workers. And that is in Kentucky at the GE Appliances manufacturing plant in Louisville. There are 5,700 workers there, and 200 of them have been targeted for deportation. The immigrant workers from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Venezuela are the ones that have been targeted. They have had some hostility from some co-workers, but an outpouring of support from their union and the local labor movement. They are part of the Communication Workers Industrial Division, IUE CWA, Local 83761. Labor Notes says that they are in the U.S. on, quote, humanitarian parole, a program that the government until now has used to provide visas to people fleeing war or political instability in certain countries.
Right. Can I just say for a second, the cruel irony of the United States engaging in really harsh sanctions regimes on countries like these, participating in the political instability of those countries, and encouraging people to oppose the governments of those countries at various times. And so some of them come here looking for that better life, and now this very same country that had, have been doing all of these things to contribute to their arrival here is now turning its back on them. So I think that is an interesting detail to this case in particular, that's the reason they were here, right? They came from those particular countries who have had political instability and in some cases have been opponents of the United States.
Right. Just some more about those workers. They began arriving in 1995 after the Cuban and U.S. governments signed an accord establishing a lottery to allow 20,000 Cubans per year into the country. Those who didn't have family to receive them in Miami went to smaller cities like Louisville. The Cuban immigrants have transformed Louisville from the dining and entertainment scenes to the makeup of its workforce, flocking to jobs at UPS, Amazon, Ford, and GE. The workforce at this plant specifically has grown from a little over 1,000 workers before 2017 to nearly 6,000 today. The surge came after the Chinese company Haier, the world's largest home appliance manufacturer, bought appliance part from GE in 2016 for $5.4 billion. Immigrant workers from, and this is fascinating about this this appliance park here. Kentucky is a right-to-work state, Labor Note says, but 97% of workers at the plant are dues-paying union members.
Wow.
Local 83761 president Dino Driscoll said they speak more than 20 different languages, came to the country legally, and contribute to their local communities. I mean, that is amazing. That is really, really, really cool stuff there. And so another thing that they mention in this article somewhere, I'm trying to look for it, is that there are some people in the plant who are confused about what the humanitarian parole program is, and they think it's some sort of disciplinary thing, but it's not. It's just it's like there's no, they've not been accused of violating any law in their home country or in this country. It's just a term that the U.S. uses for their their visa program. And so, the union says there's a lot of misinformation, confusion, and division among workers, especially around the phrase humanitarian parole, which some people incorrectly interpret to imply that workers with this legal status have criminal records. Yeon, a union member, says that despite his years in the country, he's still baffled by the ignorance of the average American.
You and me both, brother.
The Kentucky State AFL-CIO said these are human beings with families and kids who have built lives here, and they deserve dignity, compassion, and due process. The Labor Federation also highlighted that the way this information was delivered through mail notices with little to no direct assistance has left families in distress with no clear next steps. Many of the targeted workers don't speak English, which has worsened the confusion and fear. And so, again, recommend reading this article from Labor Notes. It's another good one. The title of the article is Kentucky Unions Stand Up to Halt Deportation of 200 Workers. The author is Luis Feliz Leon. Good guy, good writer, good reporter. It's a good article. So check it out.
Absolutely. I mean, an injury to one is an injury to all. So shout out to those brothers and sisters in Kentucky who are rallying behind their union siblings and trying to do the right thing. Just a real disgrace, you know, and I think we just have to be open and honest about how dehumanizing all of this really is. Mm-hmm. You know, snatching people away from their families and shipping them off to mysterious locations behind bars. It's really disturbing. It's, you know, it really is an affront to human rights. And I think it's up to all of us to be engaged in this fight, and I really appreciate IUE-CWA, that local there. Clearly, for them to have 97% membership and a right-to-work environment, they already appreciate the value of organizing, the importance of building community and building belonging among such a diverse workforce. Right. So credit to them for the work they've been doing and are continuing to do. And, shout out to the rest of the folks up in Kentucky. We love Kentucky. We are on the air in Kentucky, and we really appreciate those union siblings up there who are fighting the good fight.
And one more thing I want to say on the immigration stuff. This is back to Kilmar. You know, the government's position, the Department of Justice's position has been that, well, he's already out of our hands. So, whoopsie, sorry, we can't bring him back. And
that's a person's life.
Well, that's a person's life, yes, and it's worth stopping on that. It's worth opposing on that basis. But also, he did not have due process before he was whisked away to this El Salvador prison camp. And so there is nothing at all within the government's logic to stop them from spiriting me or you away to this El Salvador prison camp and then saying, well, he's already there, sorry, it was a clerical error, my bad, we won't do it again, but what's done is done and we can't bring him back. Like, there is literally nothing in their arguments that stops them from doing that. Maybe, and the Supreme Court has said, you got to bring him home. And Trump has also said, okay, we'll do that. If the Supreme Court says to do it, then we'll do it. It hasn't happened yet, but there is nothing at all within the positions of the Department of Justice that stops them from taking American citizens and spiriting them away to this prison labor camp for your ideas. I mean, the ICE, I don't know if you saw this, Adam. ICE literally put out a tweet last week talking about how it's their job to stop a bunch of illegal things from entering the country. And I kid you not, yes, here it is. Look at this. ICE enforces 400 plus federal laws to ensure public safety and national security. Our job is to ensure people, money, products, and intellectual property do not enter the U.S. illegally. And then this meme says, if it crosses the U.S. border illegally, it's our job to stop it. People, money, products, and intellectual oh, no, this is different. It used to say ideas.
Wow.
It said ideas before it said intellectual property. And so, and also with Mahmoud Khalil's thing, the Department of State They are not alleging that he broke any laws. They're not alleging that at all. They're saying his beliefs and associations run counter to the foreign policy goals of the United States. That is scary.
It is very scary. I mean, we are all raised to believe that this is the freest country on the earth, that freedom is innate. It's something that is natural. Like, we are all born with this freedom. And it's very disturbing to see the authoritarianism coming from our government. And it's also disturbing when you see fellow workers who are cheering it on or buying into it. I think it's a lot less than maybe we would want to believe. I'm hopeful that it's not as many as you might think. I think it's a vocal minority. But, it is very, very disturbing to see that just decline in respect for basic human rights, human dignity, that folks can have ideas and associations that you don't like. That is not an excuse to violate their human rights.
Yeah.
I mean, bottom line.
It's scary. It
is very, very scary. And, I want to see all these folks return to their families. I really do.
Yeah.
It's the least that could happen. But, it is important that labor is speaking up, and I'm glad more and more folks in the organized labor movement are speaking up. We've got to work with all of our allies and potential partners and coalitions and find ways to build that people power to push back on this, because, it's too many folks are suffering already, and to your point, they're opening the door for so much more abuse, so much more violation of our rights. It is a very, very dark time, and I think it's going to be important that we do show up for one another and have each other's back, especially when these attacks happen. When they come for one of us, they come for all of us, and I think it's important that that's how we respond. We can't just let things slide. We can't let, we can't, be confused about who some of the real problems are in this country. People like these brothers and sisters who are being taken away from their families, they are not the harm that we're experiencing in this country. They are not the cause of multiple layers of crisis that we're dealing with, right? They're not the root evils of what's happening in this country. And so, it's really important that we all stand up and show up for each other.
Right. Got a little bit of a more lighthearted story. There's trouble in paradise with Doge. I'm going to play these clips a little bit out of order. But the Department of Transportation, the DOT secretary, not so subtly hinted that he is not happy with Elon Musk and his racist Doge bros running around in his department. Let's listen to Department of Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, what he had to say about Musk.
But I want to talk about Doge for a second. Okay, I know there's been a lot of people there's been some freak out, there's been some concern, there's been a lot of emotion. And I would just tell you, do I want to make our government more efficient? Do I want to be able to do a little more with a little less? Because then I put more money into the great work that we do? Yeah, I want to do that. But you can't do that without good people, right? And so, though I want us to be more efficient, I also look, and as I think of Doge cutting things, I don't know about that elsewhere, but we actually build things here, right? You can't cut your way to a new road. You can't cut your way to a new bridge. You can't cut your way into a new air traffic control system. So we're actually going to build in this department. And if I don't, and you don't all build with me, the president's going to come back in probably 4 months and go, where are the roads? Where are the bridges? Where's the airspace revamp? And he's going to give us a very hard time. And so let me just...
So there you go. Obviously very he's about done with, the Doge kind of silliness in his department at least. And so that's good to see. And admitting reality there, that you cannot cut your way to prosperity. You cannot cut your way to more roads, to a more efficient, airline system. You just can't do that. That's not how it's going to work. And it's also worth remembering that Elon Musk has been just so gleeful in his attempts to chainsaw through the government and to fire people and stuff like that. I mean, just really having the time of his life. And so, some people, as Tesla's stock price has started to fall, some people have taken to laughing at that. And Elon Musk, even as he is laughing at the poor prospects of other people, he takes significant umbrage to people laughing at his misfortunes. This is a little bit old, but there's an update to the story. So I did get the chance to play this, and I want to do this. This is a couple of weeks ago, Elon Musk giving an interview where he literally almost cries about how people are being mean to him about his stock prices.
My companies are suffering because I'm in the government. You just pointed that out a moment ago.
Right.
Do you think it helps sales if dealerships are being firebombed? Of course not. And Tesla customers are being intimidated all over the country and all over Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help Tesla? I mean, you had Tim Waltz, who's a huge jerk, running around on stage with the Tesla stock price where the stock price had gone in half, and he was overjoyed. What an evil thing to do! What a creep! What a jerk! Like who derives joy from that? And it was pointed out to him that actually, Minnesota State Pension Fund is a major investor in Tesla. But he didn't care. He was so overjoyed by Tesla stock going in half. Does that sound like a good person to you? I don't think so.
So there you go. Very, very upset about people engaging in a little bit of schadenfreude about his stock price going down.
Bless his heart.
You really have to wonder about how one becomes so out of touch that they don't recognize what they are doing as, being so gleeful about the ruination of other people's lives. And the idea that, like, obviously, it is going to be so much worse for these federal workers who have been laid off than it is going to be for him as his stock price falls. So it's just so bizarre that he feels comfortable being so publicly whiny about this. It's so weird to me. And so the news in response to that is that Walls, like a couple of days ago, mentioned that in one of the speeches that he's been giving lately. So here's Walls' response to Elon Musk crying.
I know I'm doing something right when the Fox News crowd is all just bitching at me like crazy. I'm loving it. Or Elon Musk was crying last week. Tim is being mean to me, basically, yeah. But
So yeah, there you go. He's not super worried about that, nor would I be. I do not think it's something to be super worried about that Elon Musk is crying about you being mean to him. It's just, it's really, really crazy. Some more stuff. The AFL-CIO put out a memo about Elon Musk yesterday that's really good, about his disregard for worker safety at his companies, right? And so we've been seeing his kind of glee at, isn't it so great that I get to fire all these people? I'm having the time of my life. And that is, a really gross thing, obviously. But even beyond his interventions in the government, he has always had a disrespect for the lives of the people beneath him, that he sees as beneath him. And so they compiled like a bunch of the cases that are against all of his companies. And so here are the OSHA cases against Tesla. There are 27 open cases with violations at Tesla, 17 of which the AFL-CIO included in their memo, and 2 active investigations with no violations yet. 17 included here. In many cases, Tesla refuses to pay small fines and prolongs the process by contesting the citations. In most cases, the hazards do not have to be fixed while the citation is under contest, leaving workers in danger. So here are the headlines of those cases. In one, OSHA opened an inspection emphasizing potential lapses in fall protections at a Tesla facility in Maryland. We just talked to Jordan Barab, former OSHA official, about how fall protections are so easy to prevent, but so many people do not engage in proper fall protections, and so many people die because of that. That's one of the most common ways for people to die on the job, is by falling. No reason for that. OSHA fined Tesla's assembly plant in Fremont, California, after a worker was seriously injured when a Tesla vehicle pinned her in a car on a conveyor belt. The California OSHA cited Tesla for 4 violations totaling $38,000 after the car manufacturer failed to ensure power was cut to a conveyor belt while workers were performing quality inspections. As a result, a worker became trapped in a car after its open door struck a fixed vertical gate. Here's another one. A contracted licensed electrician died on the job while working at Tesla's Gigafactory in Austin, Texas. OSHA fined Tesla $49,000. Another one. Tesla did not report that a worker died from extreme heat while building Tesla's Gigafactory in Austin, Texas. Here's another one. Cal OSHA fined Tesla almost $90,000 for a workplace incident that injured and burned 3 workers. Another one. OSHA fined Tesla $37,000 after a worker's finger was amputated while handling clamping fixtures. Tesla is currently contesting the citations. Another one. OSHA fined Tesla's Fremont facility $8,000 after a worker's foot was struck by a powered industrial truck. Another one. OSHA fined Tesla nearly $7,000 for exposing 4 workers at Austin Gigafactory to hexavalent chromium. Another one. OSHA fined $7,000 after a worker fell from a solar panel installation, suffering a fractured lower back. Another one. OSHA fined Tesla $13,500 for serious heat violations at its Fremont, California facility. And there's like so many more. Here's some from SpaceX. A SpaceX worker was killed at a facility in McGregor, Texas, while transporting insulation without proper equipment. Another SpaceX one. OSHA fined SpaceX $18,000 after a part flew off of a rocket engine, fracturing a worker's skull. Another one. OSHA fined SpaceX after an incident in Washington State led to a near amputation when a heavy object crushed a worker's foot. From the Boring Company. OSHA fined the Boring Company $112,000 for 8 serious violations regarding underground construction PPE and failure to mitigate workplace hazards. Another one. A Boring Company worker wrote an email to the company's then safety manager stating, "We have consistently flirted with death." And at another one of his companies, Solar City, OSHA fined Solar City $110,000 for 10 violations following the electrical shock and hospitalization of a Solar City worker. And another one, OSHA fined Solar City $6,000 for faulty fall protection systems, criteria, and practices. You know, I mean, this is a guy that very clearly does not care about human life, right? And his whole bit is that I want to make sure that human consciousness becomes a solar galaxy sort of thing. But he doesn't care about the people that are trying to work at his companies, right? This is, a sociopath kind of guy. Just really, really gross and wicked and evil stuff, to use his word. So there you go. There's our Elon Musk clip for the week. Let's talk about the minimum wage for a little bit. Adam and I were talking yesterday about the minimum wage, and the last time that the minimum wage was raised was, or that a law was passed to raise the minimum wage, was in 2007. The 2007 law raised the minimum wage 3 times, once immediately, once the following year, and then again in 2009. So the last time that the wage was raised was in 2009. It has been the same since then at $7.25 an hour. It's worth noting that if the minimum wage had just kept up with inflation since its highest, purchasing power, it's the highest purchasing power of the minimum wage was sometime in the 1960s. If it had just kept up with the purchasing power of the minimum wage in the 1960s, it would be somewhere around $15 to $20 an hour now. If it had kept up with productivity, it would be something like $25 an hour now, right? And so it's bad. The situation for minimum wage workers in the country is very, very bad. It has not benefited workers to have the minimum wage stay as low as it is. And so, some people continue to try to fight for a higher minimum wage, mostly not on the national level, mostly at their companies and at the state level and stuff like that. And there was a recent rally by the Union of Southern Service Workers where at least one of the speakers spoke about their campaign to try to get Bojangles to raise their minimum wage to $25 an hour. And some people on right-wing Twitter got really upset about this. So let's listen to the clip that got them so upset.
Get burnt by just grabbing fries. I get burned all the time, slicing my finger, just grabbing fries. Yeah, and it lasts for days. So imagine every single day we're coming here, getting cut and burned for 7 to 10 hours. Imagine how many cuts and burns you get in 7 to 10 hours of constantly working. To only get paid $12? That's not enough. That won't even cover my hospital bill if I get a 3rd-degree burn. That is one more reason why we demand $25 an hour.
And so this account, which is just dedicated to Thomas Sowell quotes, which is a very bizarre thing to dedicate a Twitter account to, it's a right-wing account. And so the account said Bojangles employees want their wages to go up to $25 an hour because they get cut and burned at work. And the implication there, if I were to read that from a normal account, I would be like, okay, based. Yeah, they should. Because it's hard working in a restaurant. Like, people, having worked in a restaurant, I'm constantly kind of perplexed at how the service industry is seen as a great industry to start in as a teenager, because it is genuinely a hard and physically demanding industry as far as safety and stuff, and all of those things are true. If you work in the kitchen at a restaurant, you will get burned, you will get cut, and it will hurt, right? And so, I don't know why that's funny to these freaks, but it's true. And in addition to that, there are so many other things. There is not one other industry in the United States that has a higher prevalence of sexual harassment than restaurants. I think people should be compensated for having to deal with that. And I don't think that $25 an hour is too much, actually. I think that is an appropriate amount for a starting wage at these restaurants, and they deserve it. They work hard. And guess what? If you pay these people a higher wage, the turnover will be lower. You will not have to train replacements as often. They will be more motivated and feel like, that their job cares about them more. And so they might be willing to give a little bit more to the company. There's all sorts of reasons to raise the minimum wage. And it is kind of baffling to see people, especially as the right is trying to take on the mantle of, we are the working people's political coalition. As they are trying to do that, they are faced with a real sense of superiority that exists among so many right-wing voters, that they think that they're better than other people, especially the business owners and the small business owners and people like that. there's a real sense of superiority there. And they don't think that people who work in restaurants should not be poor. They think that people who work in restaurants should be poor. And so, it's difficult to kind of try to be the pro-worker political coalition while also openly laughing at the idea that working people should get paid a reasonable amount of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. And I think, a couple of things that come to mind. For one, I looked up the living wage calculator for Huntsville, Alabama, right, for where we're broadcasting this show. And for a single adult, they calculate that, and this is with, no children, just one adult, a living wage where you could actually afford your bills, right? It's $21.87. If you are a single parent, and there are many, many single parents out there, right? If you are one adult with one child, a living wage in the Huntsville, Alabama area is $36.09. Minimum wage is $7.25. That is a poverty wage. We shouldn't have poverty wages, right? We shouldn't have wages that are so low that if you work full time, you're still not making enough to make ends meet. Like, that doesn't make sense. The labor movement and the working class more broadly fought to win a minimum wage back in the 30s because we wanted a basic floor, right? We wanted like a basic standard that has to be met. And we've seen it decline over time, as you mentioned with those numbers at the beginning, right? It has not kept up with inflation. It has not kept up with productivity. It hasn't been raised since I was in high school. I have a third grader now and a mortgage, right? I've got gray hairs in my beard. That's wild. I graduated from high school the last time Congress adjusted the minimum wage. Now, a couple other things that come to mind. The service sector and restaurant industry in particular is very, very low union density. There are very few unions in that industry, which is part of why it has been exciting to see Starbucks Workers United and Union of Southern Service Workers.
Yes, and really quickly on that point, and I want to give it back to you. There was something that there's been a lot of conversation around, from some people on the anti-tariff side, that I'm not on the anti-tariff side. Generally speaking, but this was a good argument that some of those people were making, was that the reason that people have a nostalgia for these automotive manufacturing jobs is not because working in automotive manufacturing is so great, or that it is necessarily so great. It was good to the extent that it was good, and even that is like a little bit contested because of unions. Right? Before unions came into the automotive sector, they were terrible jobs. They had huge high turnover rates that would make a restaurant blush today. And they just burned and churned through people. And it was unionization that made those jobs bearable at all. And any job can be a union job. And as evidence of that, they pointed out that McDonald's workers in Denmark make more money than Honda workers in Alabama.
Wow.
Right? So, that's like...
And, McDonald's obviously is still making a profit over there.
Right.
They haven't shut down.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be. McDonald's is not going to go to Denmark for charity.
Right.
And the Big Macs in Denmark are not much more expensive.
Right. Yeah, I think that's all, important to point out. And the lack of unionization in the restaurant industry, it has contributed to those being quote unquote bad jobs, right? Because unions are a way to fight back against the sexual harassment that you mentioned.
Yep.
Fight back against the workplace injuries that, the sister was mentioning in the video. Unions, that's just a fact that unions are a tool and are an effective tool to combat discrimination, harassment, workplace violence, workplace injuries, deaths on the job. any kind of issues in terms of safe working conditions, decent working conditions, and, oh, by the way, that little thing we call respect, right? To have some respect on the job, have some rights on the job, have a voice on the job. And so that's one issue that we're dealing with, is that we need to see unions really take off in every industry. So there are no longer these bottom of the barrel jobs and bottom of the barrel industries that can churn and burn through people, that can take advantage of folks, that can look for, young workers, formerly incarcerated workers, currently incarcerated workers, undocumented workers, whatever the situation may be. But, any job, if it's worth doing, right, if there's value in this job, and for whatever reason we have figured out there is some value being produced, why can't it be a good job? Right. Why can't it be a good union job? Why don't those workers deserve the same rights and benefits as everyone else? Why couldn't they make enough to provide for their family, right? Go to the doctor when they're sick, maybe even have some retirement when they need it, right? Why is that such a radical idea? And, I think it's also worth pointing out that there are some states and cities that have raised minimum wages. They have not waited on federal action, and so they've done that. And that's been really exciting to see. And, people can point to whatever evidence they want to point to. I think it's been proven over time that whatever negative impacts that come from increasing the minimum wage are more than, outweighed by the positive impacts. And one other thing I'll mention on that is Alabama does not have a minimum wage. We don't have a law that sets the minimum wage in Alabama, and many southern states are like this. Or they may even have minimum wages that are below the federal, in which case, of course, the federal is what takes over. So we are relying on a law that was implemented in 2009, was enacted in 2007, right? That many years ago. Like, if you were born when this law was passed, you can drive now.
Right.
Your entire, childhood up until driving age, the minimum wage has not changed at all. And you want me to believe that that's okay? Right? Having costs gone up? The cost of everything's gone up. Utility bills, medical bills, debt, right? And student loans, right? Because, of course, people say, well, if you don't want a minimum wage job, you should go find a better job, have more skills, have more education. So what do people do? They go to college. They take various courses and classes. They go through various programs and trade schools. And then they get in debt, right? Because they're trying to better themselves. And one of the things that really stood out to me in this was years ago, when the minimum wage, there was a lot more momentum around raising the minimum wage, right? You had the raise the wage movement, and it was really taking off in various places. We had momentum here in Alabama. The city of Birmingham actually raised their minimum wage, and the state legislature swooped in and said, no, we're not going to let you do that. And so that's also a problem that we deal with, particularly here in the South, is preemption, where these state governments, who are, of course, populated by politicians who all claim to love small government, and they all love to talk about states' rights and big federal government and all this and that. But when it comes right down to it, when cities or counties within their state try to do their own thing, whether it's raising the minimum wage or, as we heard about in Texas, like passing heat protections for workers, mandatory water breaks, something as minor as that, the state actually steps in and says, no, we're not going to allow the city government to do that. No, we're not going to allow localities to actually govern the way that their local populations want them to govern. And so I think that's another factor, because and that was one of my earliest experiences in organizing and activism, was getting involved around the minimum wage. And by the time I was really doing that, I was no longer making the minimum wage. At that point, I was a teacher. I was on the very bottom of the teacher salary matrix, so it wasn't that much better. But, you know, I still, having spent years in the service sector, in the restaurant industries, just knew how important it was to provide a higher floor for people, to ensure that, you know, if we're paying folks, they're making enough for it to be worth the while. They're getting at least some return on the value that they create. It is just obscene that we have particularly large employers that rely on poverty wages, like that rely on their people being so poorly paid that they can then turn around and qualify for government benefits. And what sense does that make? Yeah, so I think this is an issue that I think organized labor really needs to rally around, and work in coalition with low-income folks. We really need to raise the minimum wage. I think it's overwhelmingly popular. And, you know, if you're one of those people who says, well, I'm making, you know, $17 an hour. If you raise it to $15 an hour, I'm barely making more, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then you deserve a raise too. Right? Like, that's the whole thing. A rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the approach that we should be trying to take and grow the economy from the bottom up. Because when low-wage workers get a raise, they go out and spend it. Mm-hmm. Right? They're not going to invest it in offshore bank accounts. It doesn't end up in the Cayman Islands, right? When folks who work in restaurants, when folks who work at gas stations, when people who work in various lower-wage sectors, when they get a raise, they're spending it. In many cases, they're just, you know, trying to climb out of the hole that they're in, right? And fix the car that needed to be fixed, and fix the HVAC system that they haven't been able to repair, right? And go to the dentist for the first time in years. Things like that, like just real practical stuff that will be spent in our economy. So it doesn't make any sense. And I think you're right that there is some moralizing around it. I think that people do look down on those in poverty. People do look down, in some cases, on people who are working in lower wage jobs, as if, you know, the wage is somehow indicative of someone's true value or worth or dignity. So these corporations are making plenty of money. They can afford it. If they can afford it in Europe, right, they can afford it here in the South. And there is no excuse. There's no excuse. We allow the South to be this refuge for low wages, and it is really obscene, and it drags down the entire country.
Yeah. Got one more segment that I want to make sure we get to, and then we'll wrap up. We'll do it quickly. Trump has been, you know, one of the big things that the Trump administration has been doing has been around deportation. We spoke about some of the other deportation stuff, but obviously there's been a lot of concern, like from businesses that utilize undocumented immigrants, about their workers being deported. And so Trump has apparently heard the pleas from the business owners, and this is what he has had to say.
So they can lay on it as well.
And we're going to work with people so that if they go out in a nice way and go back to their country, we're going to work with them right from the beginning on trying to get them back in legally. Is that right?
A chance to come back.
So it gives you a real incentive. Otherwise, they never come back. They'll never be allowed once a certain period of time goes by, which is probably going to be 60 days. We're also going to work with farmers that if they have strong recommendations for their farms for certain people, we're going to let them stay in for a while and work with the farmers and then come back and go through a process, a legal process. But we have to take care of our farmers and hotels and, you know, various places where where they need the people. And we're going to be working with you very carefully on that. So a farmer will come in with a letter concerning certain people saying they're great, they're working hard. We're going to slow it down a little bit for them. And then we're going to ultimately bring them back. They'll go out. They're going to come back as legal workers. Okay?
So there you go. Very clearly, Trump seems to be willing to make an exception for undocumented farm workers and hotel workers at the behest of their employers. But at the same time that he is publicly making this exception, his administration has kidnapped a farm worker, a migrant farm worker union organizer in Washington. And so what does it do when, at the same time that you are saying, well, we'll probably make an exception for undocumented workers in these industries, at the same time that you are doing that, you are detaining and attempting to deport a union organizer in those industries? It's sending a very clear message. And it's sending the message that capital wants. It's sending the message that we will allow undocumented immigrants into this country specifically because they are so easy to exploit, because we can make use of ICE as a cudgel on behalf of the employer to say, look, you're welcome for being in this country. If you ask for anything more, we will just send you back. Right? That is obviously not good for the immigrants. It is not good for the immigrant union organizers, but it is also not good for American workers, which is what this whole deportation regime is ostensibly on behalf of. This is being done ostensibly on your behalf as a native-born American worker. How does it help you to be harassing and deporting union organizers, people who are directly responsible for lifting the working conditions up of undocumented immigrants in the farm industry? How does that help you? The answer is that it doesn't, because that it takes away one of the few mechanisms that are lifting up wages and working conditions in this industry that is so heavily dominated by immigrants. It is taking away one of the few things that lift, one of the few pressures up on wages and working conditions, so that the overwhelming force of the pressures will be down. And so it's all sorts of muddled and, all sorts of muddled if you are taking them at face value, which you shouldn't. You should realize that what they are doing is they're doing the thing that supports capital, which is allowing the border to be sort of porous, to allow some people through, to allow some undocumented folks to stay because they are so exploitable, because it benefits people who make profit, right? I think, and so what would actually help you as an American-born worker would be to create a pathway towards permanent residency and citizenship for the undocumented workers here, so that they can stand up and assert their rights without fear of being targeted for deportation like this farm worker organizer in Washington. His name is Alfredo Lalo Juarez. His immigration status is not known. ICE is not saying whether or not he is an undocumented worker or he has deportation proceedings or anything. They have made no allegations of him having violated the law. The only thing that anybody can think of is that this is because of his union organizing. And there has not been any reporting since he was kidnapped, well over a week ago. There's been no more new news about this, which is a scary thing in and of itself. This guy, who was very prominent in the immigrant worker community in Washington, was just kidnapped a week or two ago, 2 weeks ago, and there's been no news since then. ICE has not said anything else. There's been that's a scary thing that can happen to somebody like that. So there you go. Appreciate everybody tuning in. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the show today. Adam, do you have anything else before we leave?
Yeah, I just want to encourage folks to, as always, check out the trainings and resources available at Labor Notes, labornotes.org/events. Let's see what they have on deck right now and share that with you guys, because I think right now there's a couple reasons to be plugged into stuff like this, right? Because for one, we need to be educating ourselves. Like, education, there's a reason the saying is educate, agitate, organize, right? Educate comes first. And there's a reason for that. So we do always have to be educating ourselves and getting more people educated, getting more people tapped in to the skills and the knowledge that we need to be effective, to build a strong movement, to build a strong, democratic, vibrant, and militant labor movement. And broader from that, just a powerful working class movement, a movement of the everyday people, we the people. We have to build that. That is the only thing that's going to resolve the issues that we talk about week in, week out, right? Is mass collective action, mass people power, rooted in all of our diversity, working through those diverse, issues that we have, and building solidarity around our common interest. So education is essential. It's important. So, not only just to learn more ourselves, but to get more people tapped into it, to connect with other people. Some of the, when I do a lot of workshops and trainings throughout Alabama, and part of it, of course, is to teach folks, but also part of it is just to connect people, right? To get people in the same room or on the same Zoom, talking to each other, like thinking about some of the same ideas, thinking about some of the same subjects and problems that we're posed with, and how we can come up with solutions. So I would just encourage everyone out there to find ways to train, find ways to get educated, find ways to learn, whatever that looks like for you. Some people, have to read a physical book. Some people need audiobooks, and struggle to pay attention to reading text, computer or physical copies. Whatever works for you. There are different learning styles, different ways that people absorb information and retain information. But whatever you're doing education-wise, try to do it with other people. It's always, more fun and more successful when you're learning with others. So with all that preamble out of the way, I do want to make sure you know that Labor Notes has a training on April 14th, Tactics to Build Power. That sounds really cool. So you've got a boss who's making bad decisions. You're angry about the dismantling of public services and the attack on federal workers. You're ready to bring your coworkers into collective action, maybe. Maybe you're planning some May Day 2025 actions, right? So this is a workshop about campaign tactics that target the boss, get wins, and build the power to take on shop floor fights and grow the movement to stop the billionaire agenda. We will hear about effective tactics that bring workers into solidarity and scare the boss and the billionaires. So really, that's great. That's an exciting workshop. April 14th, 6:30 Central, Tactics to Build Power. Labor Notes is also offering, as they do typically each month, a workshop called What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart. We all have, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have been there at various points in our journey through the labor movement, where maybe you're local or your state fed or your international union has really just been grinding your gears and has upset you in some way. Maybe a leader has, or the direction of your institution. And so this is a really helpful workshop to think through, what do you do? And the answer, spoiler alert, is not just quit and walk away and forget about it all. That is not the answer. Also, on April 17th is a really interesting sounding training called Expand Your Reach as a Troublemaker. And so this is a new workshop that Labor Notes is offering. Whether you're launching a bottom-up campaign, building a stewards network, or running for union office, learn the skills you'll need to systematically build a list of your coworkers from scratch and make the best use of it. So that sounds really helpful, really practical. That's, again, April 17th, 6 p.m. Central. On April 23rd, Labor Notes is offering Steering Green Transitions. And so that's going to be a really good conversation talking about, everything from construction strikes for the environment in Australia to folks building a new union in the heart of the Southern Battery Belt. So that's April 23rd, 7 p.m. Central. If you're interested in green energy, climate transition, and how to make sure we actually have good union jobs in these new industries, this definitely sounds like a good conversation. And, as they typically do each month, they have a stewards workshop dealing with difficult supervisors. Lord help us. Many of us in our time in our time as workers will experience difficult supervisors. And if you're a union rep, if you're a steward or an officer or a staff rep, or any sort of responsibility you have to advocate for your union brothers and sisters, difficult supervisors will keep you very, very busy. And so this is a good workshop to check out. Again, that's April 24th, 6:30 p.m. Central. Wow, Labor Notes really does have a lot going on because they also have another workshop at the end of the month, April 30th, Winning a Strong Contract, Parts 1 and 2. So if you are gearing up for negotiations, or maybe you've just organized a new union and you're getting ready for that next part of your journey, this will be a good one, How to Win Strong Contracts. And that's on April 30th. And I do believe there is a Troublemaker School coming up in New Orleans, if I remember right, in May. So yeah, a lot going on there. Also want to encourage folks to check out the Federal Unionist Network, FUN. They have been doing a lot of really great organizing. I know they plan to offer a lot of training as well. So get trained up, y'all. Get trained up, learn new skills, meet new people. It's really, really important and helpful for the cause. Just find what you can do to make a difference because, whoever's listening, wherever you're coming from, there's something you can do to help build a stronger working class movement that can build a better future for all of us. So appreciate all of you listening. Thanks again to everyone who's called, commented online. Don't forget to leave us a voicemail throughout the week. We'd love to hear those dispatches from folks. Let us know what's going on, whether it's a bad boss, whether it's a union story in your local, a new piece of legislation in Montgomery or in your state house. Let us know what's going on. 844-899-TVLR. We really appreciate that. And I think that's all I have. So thanks and solidarity forever, y'all.
See y'all next week.